report contains our findings about the refurbishment itself. And again, the picture is disturbing. First, the regulatory context in which the work was carried out was, in our view, unsatisfactory because the statutory guidance, which was treated by many in the construction industry, including those engaged on the refurbishment, as containing a sufficient statement of what was required, did not make it clear enough that it was subject to the overriding requirements of the building regulations. That was a particular problem in relation to the rain screen panels, which, although they satisfied the requirement in the guidance for a material with a Class 0 surface, contained a highly combustible core. But that is only the beginning. The tenant management organisation, as the client, manipulated the process of appointing an architect to design the refurbishment in order to avoid the need to invite open tenders for the architectural services. It did so because it wanted to appoint studio.
Fucking adverts are gonna kill me. I was watching the fucking inquiry. Twat. Well, they can't say I'm not helping them with this shitty adverts. Oh, here we go. Thank you.
Wednesday morning on BBC Two, which of course means Prime Minister's Questions with full analysis on Politics Live.
It's Wednesday, it's 11:15 and we're live in Westminster. 7 years after the Grenfell Tower fire, the public inquiry has published its final report. But what will justice for the victims look like?
The simple truth is that the deaths that occurred were all avoidable, and those who lived in the tower were badly failed over a number of years and in a number of different ways by those who were responsible for ensuring the safety of the building and its occupants.
Most likely, the boat collapsed very fast. The smugglers had provided no more than 8 life jackets. So, if help had not arrived so fast, far more people would have faced certain death.
After 12 people died off the French coast yesterday, what can be done to stop migrants crossing the channel in small boats?
We will set up Great British Energy. This is a publicly owned energy company that will ensure that we have renewable energy, which is cheaper, so bills will be down permanently.
That was during the election campaign, but will Labour's green energy plans really mean cheaper bills? And Keir Starmer will face questions from Rishi Sunak at Prime Minister's Questions for the first time since the summer break. Joining me to discuss all that, Labour MP Polly Billington, Conservative MP Ben Obse-Jekti, Gabby Hinsliff from The Guardian and Liam Halligan from The Telegraph. This is Politics Live. Welcome. Well, the second and final report into the Grenfell Tower fire disaster has been published literally in the last 10 minutes or so. It was 7 years after the tragedy. It's the worst residential fire since the Second World War, in which 72 people died. The chairman of the inquiry, Martin Morbick, a retired judge, in his opening remarks delivered a damning indictment. Let's take a listen.
The simple truth is that the deaths that occurred were all avoidable, and those who lived in the tower were badly failed over a number of years and in a number of different ways by those who were responsible for ensuring the safety of the building and its occupants. They include the government, the tenant management organisation, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, those who manufactured and supplied the materials used in the refurbishment, those who certified their suitability for use on high-rise buildings, the architect, the principal contractor, and some of its subcontractors, in particularly Harley Curtain Wall and its successor Harley Facades. Some of the consultants, in particular the fire engineer Exover Warrington Fire, the local authority's building control department, and the London Fire Brigade. Not all of them bear the same degree of responsibility for the eventual disaster, but as our reports show, all contributed to it in one way or another, in most cases through incompetence, but in some cases through dishonesty and greed.
Now, the families of the victims have already waited such a long time to hear Martin Morvik deliver his report and hear what he had to say. It could be several more years before any prosecutions actually occur. What does justice look like for the victims and their families?
Well, I think it will need to be some kind of prosecutions. I think that's where things are likely to go. I think one of the concerns that people will have is that quite often when it comes to corporate manslaughter, there's a lot of talk about it and very few prosecutions. There is obviously clearly going to be a bit of time where the Metropolitan Police are going to look at the findings of the inquiry in order to be able to make some of those decisions. But my concern would be we've got that, if the legislation that we've got very rarely results in convictions, so I think we'd need to see what the judicial process will result in.
Well, Ben, that's certainly what the front page of The Eye is also underlining. Grenfell guilty must now be prosecuted, urge MPs and survivors. We, of course, don't know the full contents yet because literally it has been published, but your impression in terms of what justice must look like?
I think looking at the sort of the initial announcement and the statement there from Martin Morvik, it's very clear that justice must be served, and as a party I think we are very much going to row in behind the CPS and the police in their pursuit of prosecutions. We're looking at potentially another couple of years until anybody is brought to justice, but I would imagine that the families involved in this would definitely want closure and the effective justice to be done.
Do you think Keir Starmer will just accept all the recommendations in the report, even though we haven't had sight of all of them? Do you think he should just accept them?
Well, we'll see what they are. I mean, none of us have seen the report in detail, and obviously he's going to make a statement in the House later on today. I think, you know, going to what Ben said, and the thoughts I think all of us have to be not only with the 72 who died, but the people who are living with the consequences of that. And that's the families of those people who died, but also the people across the country who are living with the consequences of this basically structural failure, institutional failure of the regulators, of government, of the industry. I've got 6 tower blocks in Thanet which have waking watches because...
What, there's 24-hour
Because the 24 hours
yes.
in order to be able... Because we currently don't have security when it comes to this fire safety. And what we saw in Dagenham only a week or so ago
which was the fire
means that where 100 households lost their homes. It's amazing that there were no deaths then. And that suggests that this not only is it when justice is delayed, justice is denied, it's actually people's safety is denied while we're continuing to manage to get these things sorted out.
Well, and that is an ongoing and critical issue. As Polly has said, there is a statement, a prime ministerial statement, straight after PMQs from Keir Starmer on the report into the Grenfell fire disaster. We will bring that to you, certainly the beginning of it, live after Prime Minister's questions. A couple of things to pick up on. Yes, there are, of course, the survivors. They themselves have waited to hear this report, the trauma of the testimony of so many of those who did manage to get out of the tower before it was completely overwhelmed and engulfed, and this issue that government figures from March show that nearly 2,000 social housing blocks in England have life-critical problems with their external cladding still.
And it's staggering. And, you know, I think the last stat I heard was that, you know, yes, remediation work has started in over 50% of the affected buildings. That's still an awful lot where work hasn't even started, and, you know, hundreds where it hasn't finished. And then you've got people putting their kids to bed at night in, you know, on the 30th floor of some building that you don't know is safe or not. And, you know, it is astonishing that we've got to that point. And that apparently the problem is, you know, we have a lack of capacity in construction shade, we don't have enough skilled builders, we don't have enough... It's difficult to sort of disentangle some of this stuff from the fabric of the building. But 7 years is an incredibly long time for people to be living with
Gabby.
this.
It's also people doing that when it comes to the blame.
Which is what we saw with the inquiry.
Somebody else.
Which is what we saw throughout the inquiry. Oh, it wasn't us. Yes, we did X, but look, you know, over here, that guy, you know.
And that legal complexity, particularly where you've got housing associations and shared ownership, means that, oh no, we just manage the building. Oh no, we just operate that bit. Oh no, there's people who are paying money for those waking watches and are not sure that their own homes are safe. They can't move. And all of that is compounding the injustice, that it goes way beyond.
And developers who've gone out of business and so on since they actually put the buildings up. So I'm not saying it's easy to unravel, but I can completely understand the frustration of people who are trapped in that situation. I think it's important for a Starmer government that came in saying we will restore trust in public life. You know, I think this is yet another situation. We've seen it before with the Horizon scandal, we've seen it with the infected blood scandal, where you have to, as a citizen, as an individual, place your trust. You have to think, well, you know, somebody's inspected this building. There's building regs, guys. You know, builders know what they're doing. Nobody would make me live somewhere that was actively dangerous. And that trust has been betrayed, you know, and government has to show people that we can do better in the future.
I mean, the merry-go-round of buck passing, you might call it, has gone on because the government, the previous Conservative governments, really struggled to try and make different companies, individuals, councils accountable. But some would say the government should have just coughed up the money, the billions needed to remove dangerous cladding.
Well, you know, Jo, there's lots we're really good at in this country, but we're really bad at inquiries after tragedies of any kind. Look how long the inquiry into Bloody Sunday took. Look how long the COVID inquiry is taking. It's absolutely outrageous that prosecutions aren't going to begin, defendants aren't going to even appear in court until late 2026 at the earliest, Jo, which of course is almost 10 years after this inquiry. And just to emphasise the points made so well, I thought, by Polly and Gabby, there's not a cigarette paper between us on this really. There are still 4,630 residential buildings in this country of 11 metres and over that still have this flammable cladding as of the end of July. Only 29% of the buildings have had the remediation work done. So as we've heard, there are many thousands of families, including children, who are living in tower blocks, both privately owned and social housing, surrounded by material that the government has already decreed by law is unsafe. And that's why you have these crazy waking watches.
Right, when it comes to concrete proposals, though, Polly, I mean, is the Labour government going to do anything that is materially different to what the previous Conservative governments tried to do on a couple of fronts? Agreement with developers to contribute a minimum of £2 billion towards cladding remediation, and also funds from the central government directly to repair and remove it from social housing. I mean, what else will the Labour government do?
Well, I think we'll see what the Labour government will do, our government will do, when Keir Starmer stands up after Prime Minister's questions and does his statement, and we'll be able to see further on that. Already, for example, Angie Rayner and the minister responsible for this, in particular, Rushnara Ali, have already met with the Buildings Controls Regulator in order to be able to speed this up, because we've got situations, again, when talking about the ones in my own constituency, where it's all ready to go to get this stuff done, and the buildings regulator have not signed it off. And that means people still waiting, not sure whether their places are safe. So speeding it up would be a start. I think there's a lot of impatience from people. Understandably, they voted for change. They want to be able to see that. On things like this, which is a big institutional failures, we're going to have to see some of that change happen sooner rather than later.
I mean, people will look...
Very briefly, the inquiry... Sorry, Jo, the inquiry itself has taken far too long. With respect, it took over 2 years for the Conservatives to even publish the proposals for the scope of the inquiry, not the actual inquiry, what it will examine. 2 years just to do that.
Well, I think there's testimony from one of the survivors that if they'd known it was going to take this long...
crazy.
Yeah, if it was going to take this long, they perhaps wouldn't have supported it. 7 years, though, under Conservative governments. You can admit today, surely, it's just taken far too long.
I think it has. I was on a train into London on the morning after the Grenfell Tower, and from coming through Clapham Junction, I could see the tower burning in the distance, and that feels to me like almost like a lifetime ago. This inquiry, I think, has cost £231 million, and it absolutely must have an end result. You know, we must see that justice is done at the end of this process, that we get clarity on the path forward, and that those people who are still living with the nightmare of being in buildings that have flammable cladding on them, as well as the families who have been impacted by this, are seen to get the right result.
All right, let's talk about what happened yesterday in the Channel. Have a look at this headline, BBC News. 12 die after migrant boat sinks in the Channel. The boat was clearly overloaded. Amongst the 12 who lost their lives, there was a pregnant woman and at least 6 children. Now, we don't know the nationalities of all those who died in the Channel, but many, we are told, were from Eritrea. It's the deadliest loss of life in the Channel this year, but that hasn't stopped another crossing earlier this morning. We can show you pictures here of people trying off the coast of France to get into another overcrowded boat. You can see them there wading out into the water. It is, in fact, the boat eventually intercepted by the French Coast Guard vessel. But as I say, it hasn't stopped literally within 24 hours following the deaths reported yesterday of another boat. There is the French Coast Guard there. Let's have a look at the front page of the Daily Mail. How long before the vile smuggling gangs are stopped? The crossings are continuing, Polly. Labour has promised to smash the gangs. How long will that take?
I just keep looking at those pictures and just thinking about those children who aren't with us anymore because of the desperation of their families and the evil criminal gangs who are exploiting them. That's why we want to be able to beef up the border agency and include the security services in being able to do this, and spend the money that was previously spent on the Rwanda scheme to invest in cracking down on those gangs, because it is their exploitation of people's desperation that is driving a lot of this. And we do need.
What does that actually look like?
It means
because this is a suggestion here that the NCA have been twiddling their thumbs for years and doing nothing.
Well, what I'm saying is that it will include the security services, which I think is quite important in terms of being able to have that kind of power, and using the anti-terror laws, which we've previously not been using, in organised criminal law,
but if we can't stop things like handguns and drugs being brought into the country, how are we suddenly going to manage to do that with criminal gangs smuggling people?
I think what we need to do is to be able to make sure that we are allocating resources, security services resources, to tackle these criminal gangs, which we previously have not been doing, and using that anti-terror legislation and legislation against organised criminality, because that is what this is. Now, I know, Ben, we all know that those things, we can't stop everything, but we could do a lot more than we have currently been doing, because there's been the spending
Should Labour not
of
be
that
looking
money.
at the pull factors, reasons why people are coming
Well,
here?
I also think we need to be thinking about the push factors, and one of them is the fact we don't have any safe routes. And that drives that desperation to cross the Channel. And that happens to people that literally turn up on the beaches.
We can come on to that, but let's focus on the
community.
Demand, because clearly the demand isn't going away in terms of people still paying money, however dangerous it becomes.
Well, that's what I mean about having to have some safe routes. Remember, the 5-point plan that the Labour Party stood on, and the platform that we stood on in order to be able to get elected, included commitment to safe routes, greater cooperation with our neighbours, and to identify some of the causes of this, and to step up internationally to be able to tackle some of the conflicts. People are not everybody. There will be people who are simply fleeing or coming for economic reasons, but a lot of people will be fleeing desperate.
How does it stop people who are coming for economic reasons?
Well, what we'll have to do is make sure that we're no longer having those gangs there to exploit them. People are paying a lot of money to be able to get into a shonky boat and therefore end up in a very, very dangerous situation.
We've been talking about this. The Prime Minister's been talking about this for a long time now, and we keep hearing the same things. We're going to smash the gangs. We're going to smash the gangs. He's been asked repeatedly what he's going to do with the people who are already here who can't be sent back to a safe country, and there's been no answer on that. There's thousands
we've already
of people.
sent hundreds back to Brazil, for example, recently.
But there are tens of thousands here.
Yeah, but Ben, I know you're a new MP and it might be difficult to take responsibility for the previous government, but some of the things that they did, which was failing to invest in processing people, so that we've got people sitting in hotels in my constituency because they're not being processed.
But when they've been processed,
that is wrong.
What happens to them?
Well, then they need to be returned to where there are safe countries.
And if they can't be returned?
And then we'll need to be able to do more to be able to establish where the safe countries are and where there aren't.
Plan for the people who can't be returned.
Some people will be asylum seekers, Ben. Some people will be asylum seekers. Some will be legitimate refugees.
I'm talking about those who aren't.
Well, then if they've got a safe country that they can go back to, then we'll send them back to them.
So say they've thrown their passport away as they come over, they've arrived here, they claim to be from a country that isn't safe, they aren't given asylum, where would you send them?
Well, we'll need to send them to a safe country. We will need to establish that.
So Labour are going to send people who fail asylum to a safe country that they're not necessarily
I'm going to bring in our other two guests, but do you want to also say, on behalf of the last Conservative government, which spent an awful lot of time on this, in terms of stopping the boats, which you failed to do, quite evidently, this was something that you just couldn't get to grips with?
I think it's an enormously complex task, and I think it's one that's that so far we have not seen an adequate response to across the board. Well, what is clear is that we need to see a deterrent. That deterrent was removed by the Labour government. 8,000 people have crossed since they removed the deterrent. The NCA themselves have said that the deterrent needs to be put in place, and so far Labour has not suggested what sort of deterrent is going to be put in place going forward.
Well, let's have a look in terms of the numbers so far from my BBC colleague Simon Jones. He's tweeted more than 8,100 people have reached the UK on small boats since Labour came to power. That's a drop of 16% on the same period last year, though August this year did see a long period of rough weather in the Channel. I mean, despite everything that was talked about during the campaign by the Labour government, those numbers are still extremely high.
They are. And we've seen fluctuations before now. They often tend to have more to do with the weather than with policy. I think the one thing, the Home Office will probably be, I would say, quietly relieved that it hasn't gone up, because that was the argument a lot of people made in the run-up to the election. Oh, you cancel the Rwanda scheme, you take away the deterrent, then numbers will go through the roof. That we haven't seen that happen. So what's that telling us? It's telling us that the threat of a Rwanda scheme that was never actually going to work in practice and never happened wasn't much of a deterrent. But the new scheme, just 1 minute, Ben. The new scheme, the new regime hasn't acted yet as a deterrent either. We are kind of roughly where we were. Almost whatever anyone was tried, we've ended up where we were. I think the one thing that's been interesting this time is the French have responded by talking about needing a new migration treaty with the UK. Now, one of the things Labour said, Polly mentioned it, one of the things Labour said during the run-into the election was, we need to cooperate. The answer to this problem lies somehow between us and France. It lies in better cooperation with the French. What that looks like, what the French would want from us in return for maybe more vigorous and widespread French enforcement. Who knows? A lot more money, but potentially also, I think, on the French side, you often hear the argument they're drawn by the labour market in the UK. It's too easy to get work in the black market in the UK, and that's what pulls people over. That's what they say. And, it's interesting that the Home Office has started talking more recently about stepping up immigration raids on places where they know people are working illegally, car washes, nail salons, that kind of thing.
Liam?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just car washes, it's like a lot of the construction industry and so on. Look at my name. I'm from immigrant stock. I spent most of my adult life arguing for the merits of immigration, of which my family have been a part. But aside, just for a second, from the tragedy of the small boats and the horrific news from last night, at least 6 children. I mean, it's just crazy. The really big issue here is legal migration. If we should just say that, just hear me out, Joe. The legal migration got up in 2022 to the equivalent of the city of Sheffield, one of our biggest cities, in one single year. And a lot of people at the sharp end of the labour market that are competing for housing, competing for public services, they've now got to the point where that is a real issue for them. And the political class is finally responding to that. Look what happened in the European Parliament elections. Look what's just happened in Germany, with immigration being a big issue.
Are you saying the focus should be on that issue more than the... I'm just asking, because the numbers are so vast...
Yeah, in numerical terms, of course, it's legal migration that is the huge issue. But of course, because illegal migration with the small boats, the tragedy is so visceral and human and in front of our eyes as the numbers tick up every day. It's much, much more visible. Look, a few things. Labour are clearly going to have to work out what they're going to do about this. I'd say that across the European Union, the deportation success rate is up at 30%, up from 20% just last year. I do think, with regret, however distasteful it is, there will need to be some kind of third country place where claims can be processed. Otherwise, people just disappear into the twilight economy, and it takes 10 years on average to process these claims, by which case, you know, illegal immigration has worked for that person. So that's why they're paying upwards of £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 to sit in a boat that could be a death trap. There is a lot. Obviously, Polly's completely right. We need to preserve our safe routes. Of course, we need to.
We don't have any safe routes. That's the problem.
They're very, very small numbers. I agree with you. And we need to make sure there is a route for genuine asylum seekers. But Ben's also got a point. You know, people don't pay £4 or £5 grand.
No, of course not.
If they're an asylum seeker.
Well, I mean, of course, we don't know, do we? Until their applications are actually processed, and the vast majority
people are economic migrants. And animus, I understand, because it's what my people did.
But a lot of applications are processed,
it was legal,
and they are granted. Just to talk about your point about a third country being used, would you support that idea? I mean, it is going back to an older...
I think we're going to have to investigate how we have a return scheme so that people can go to places that are safe. But I think what we know at the moment is that we're not even processing people fast enough. I think what's interesting is anecdotally, I know from having spoken to people who work with the asylum seekers in my own community that they are already seeing that process speeding up. They're just already, the Home Office has got in touch with them. They've been sat, and I think this is the other thing is these people quite often may well be economic migrants, desperate and keen to be able to work, and are stuck, unable to do any of that. Are desperately pleased when the Home Office gets in touch and says, right, okay, let's get this process.
We must acknowledge there are vested interests in the system who want these delays. Well, you know, the Grenfell inquiry was a lawyer's bonanza paid for by us. A lot of the issues around whether or not people can be deported, the legal status. There's a lot of lawyers making a lot of money out of this.
Well, I think
we need to be realistic about that.
It's a failure to invest in processing.
There are a couple of things here. It is important, this suggestion from Liam about having a third country where you could send people whose asylum applications are either to be processed or deport people to countries where there are no agreements with the UK, like Eritrea, like Iran, like Afghanistan, in order to actually find a resting place for these people.
I agree, and I think that needs to be in place not only as a deterrent but also as an option. But also we need to look at Liam's wider point about other vested interests. Look at the local councils who are going to really struggle if all of these asylum seekers who are here currently are granted asylum, and by that I mean in the round all the people who have applied for asylum, whether or not they are truly eligible. The strain on social housing in inner city areas is going to go through the roof, and you only need to look at some areas of London to see how that is impacted by the number of HMOs that we have and the number of people who are living there.
But this actually goes to a point about the last government's black hole. They allocated £350 million a year for housing of asylum seekers. When you actually look at the books, they were spending £7 billion. Right? So this is not so suddenly this is going to be a massive burden on the state that wasn't there before. It already is a burden on the state because they're spending the money on housing these people.
Local authorities aren't spending that money.
Yeah, they are.
But this is something that the government now is going to have to deal with. But on the third,
spending the money on processing it is important.
If you think having a third country in this sort of mix of trying to deal with people coming here and claiming asylum, what was wrong with Rwanda?
Well, because it wasn't a safe country and it was clearly a gimmick, right? We ended up sending more Home Secretaries there than we did any asylum seekers and anybody who has been rejected. So I don't think that's realistic, and that money is going to be much better spent cracking down on the gangs than it is.
So how are you going to spend money?
This is a slight red herring, and what we're going to end up looking at, or what this government is going to end up looking at again, is a return to offshore processing rather than kind of moving people to a sort of some unidentified magical country that wants to accept our
idea.
It's going to be offshore. Process your application for asylum somewhere outside the country and find a country that is prepared to do the processing.
And would you agree to that? Or do you still want to see a Rwanda scheme where people are actually sent to have not just their applications processed, but to stay there?
I think you need to look at the end-to-end process and understand exactly what's going to work given the numbers that are coming and frankly, the amount of money that you have to spend on it. I mean, to Polly's point, she would like to see the implementation of safe routes as well as
more safe routes, I think.
So more safe routes, a third safe country, and also to process the people who are already here. Those things all cost money, and unless we're going to put numbers on exactly what the priority is...
Quite a lot of money was spent on Rwanda. I mean, James Cleverly... Well, let's just have a look at this headline. James Cleverly, Home Secretary formerly, and now Shadow Home Secretary, also standing for the leadership, vows to resurrect the Rwanda scheme. Is he right?
I think by the time we're in a position to do that, the situation could well have changed. So I wouldn't want to make up policy on the hoof, but we're looking at 5 years away from being able to make a decision on exactly what the right decision should be at that point.
Are you surprised that candidates for the Tory leadership are supporting the idea of resurrecting Rwanda?
No, I'm not. I mean, I agree with Polly that there were very problematic issues with the Rwanda scheme itself. And again, I say this with regret, the idea of using third countries to process is now mainstream across, centre-left parties across the European Union.
The idea is.
Yeah. So it's not like it's some horrendous thing. And just on the Tory leadership contest...
But it depends where. I mean, you could have offshore processing in France on the other side of the channel, or in Rwanda, which might be more
you can, but mainstream EU parties are now looking at third-party processing for the same reasons that our political and media class have been doing so. And one other thing I'd say on this Tory leadership contest, which I'm sure we'll come on to, this idea that you have to leave the ECHR to solve this small boats problem, that's just... It may be part of the solution, but many other EU countries in the ECHR, as we are, they deport people with a 30% success rate on average, as I've just shown.
And that is another big discussion, which we'll leave for another day. Let's talk about the Great British Energy Bill. Has its second reading in the Commons tomorrow. And you heard Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, at the beginning of the programme, saying it will bring bills down. He tweeted this during the election. Labour's first step to set up Great British Energy will save families up to £300 a year off their energy bills. A vote for Labour on Thursday, the 4th of July, is a vote for change, and so on. But let's have a look at this headline in The Telegraph from earlier this week, which actually accuses Labour, Ed Miliband in particular, the Energy Secretary, betraying families with energy-saving pledge, says Claire Coutinho. Shadow Energy Secretary says her successor's policy is rooted in ideology rather than fact. Polly, do you stand by Keir Starmer's claim, the Prime Minister's claim, that Great British Energy will reduce people's energy bills by up to £300 a year?
That was based on independent modelling at the time, and that was what that's what the platform that I stood on and many other people stood on.
And you stand by it.
And I think what we've got to understand is that we will be lowering bills. The reality that bills are going up now is because the previous government failed to wean us off the oil and gas, which gives us the energy spikes that we're seeing. So we need to be doing what we're doing in terms of renewable energy because it's cheaper, because it's cleaner, and because it's homegrown and increases our energy security.
Liam, do you agree?
Well, I agree in general that renewable energy is a good thing, and this country's done pretty well. 40% on average of our electricity is provided by renewable energy. Coal over the last 15 years has gone from 35% of our electricity to 1%. That's a tremendous achievement. What I would say, though, is that unless electricity bills start to come down for ordinary people, the idea that moving to renewable energy, which I support, the political support for that will erode away. Let's just have a look briefly at some of the numbers. In the UK, the average household, these are numbers from what's called HEPI, the Household Electricity Price Index. In the UK, cent euro per kilowatt hour, it's 35.5 households are paying as of July. In France, it's 30.6. Spain, it's 19.5. Sweden, it's 17. We have very, very expensive electricity for households and firms in this country. That's what the numbers show.
So will Labour's plans
despite
work?
our big renewable share. And it's, aside from the green energy company, it's all to do with how we trade electricity in this country. The model is broken. It's all linked to the marginal price of gas.
Yes,
and that is what's pushing up electricity prices, plus our lack of gas storage. And unless these electricity prices come down, and ordinary people feel the benefit from all this renewable stuff.
I can understand why ordinary people
The short answer is that model, that £300, 300 quid off your bill, is based on the assumption that 98% of our electricity will be from clean sources by 2030. We're not on track to do that at the moment.
Right.
If Great British Energy, by providing more capacity to invest in renewables, gets us to that point, then our bills will come down. If it doesn't, then our bills won't come down by anything like as much as we want to.
But it also requires the market reform that Liam
not
talked
necessarily,
about.
Gabby.
And it does require market
because we already have very high renewable share and the
things.
most expensive electricity in Europe. That's my point.
It requires lots of other things, but at the moment, we are short of where we need to be by 2030. And if Great British Energy gets us to that point, yes, our bills will come down, and that's marvellous.
But you need to look at the impact of the way that Labour are going about this. So in my constituency in Huntingdon, there's a new solar farm planned. It's 1,800 acres. It's bigger than Gatwick Airport. It's 6 miles long. And the Energy Minister said that will be implemented irrespective of local wishes. So the fact that people locally are opposed to it is irrelevant. It is going to be railroaded through because it is an NSIP project, and therefore it will be implemented across good quality farmland, and that is what the report has shown. And that goes for the same for Sonica in the east of Cambridgeshire, and all the other energy projects that they have online as well. So doing this and forcing this through for net zero ideology, and I'm not opposed to renewable energy, but I don't see that we should be impacting people unduly.
They're not in your backyard.
It's not necessarily in my backyard, but we need to be more clever about the way that we implement this. Why aren't we putting it on top of car parks? Why aren't we putting it on the roofs of houses, alongside railways? Why are we using good quality farmland and therefore jeopardising our food security?
We're not jeopardising our food security.
Well, we are. We're using good quality farmland.
Complete nonsense. If you have ground-based solar panels, it's the cheapest way of being able to generate electricity. It's the most flexible. You can reverse it very easily.
They're on concrete bases in farmland. The impact that has on soil quality, on the impacting of soil.
You can combine it with agricultural use. You talk to anybody who understands the solar energy industry, and they will tell you. And indeed, farmers themselves know that they can combine it.
You can't farm land that has solar panels on it.
You do. You can have that agricultural land alongside.
We can't do any of this unless we solve our intermittency problem, which is big in the UK.
The unreliability.
We often don't have sun. The wind often doesn't blow, particularly in winter when demand for electricity is highest.
But that is also about
what we desperately need is baseload electricity, a stable supply that allows renewables to do their thing intermittently, which they can only ever do intermittently. So we need more nuclear.
But that sounds that you are sceptical then, that a massive expansion of what you are saying is intermittent and unreliable at times.
I'm just honest.
No, we need a smart grid. We need a smart grid, and we need storage as well as nuclear, right? What I find really interesting about this, and I can bore on about energy for quite a long time because I've been doing it for a bit, but the reality is you need to have a range of different technologies that work together in order to be able to complement each other.
Joe,
saying no to one or just banking everything on another is not the way that we will solve this energy crisis.
Can I just come back, Joe, because you called me a sceptic, which in the context of this discussion is obviously extremely loaded word.
No. I mean, sceptical about whether the plans will work.
As you probably know. Yes. I'm not sceptical. I've just spent a lot of time studying our electricity market, which many journalists don't. And we desperately need baseload electricity in order for the renewables to work properly without threatening outages. The worst way to kill the public support for renewable energy and pro-environmental policies in general is to not deliver much cheaper bills. We have almost the most expensive electricity in Europe, and to threaten outages.
The risk, though, the risk, though, Gabby, is that there is going to need a lot of investment up front in terms of subsidies, perhaps, to get some of these licences and projects off the ground. And that might mean bills going up initially before they come down.
Well, that, certainly in part, is the idea of Great British Energy, that it becomes a vehicle to draw in investment. I think the single biggest problem, probably, in terms of public and political support is just going to be the time it takes. We're going to come on to talk, I know, in a minute about winter fuel allowance, but a lot of people are facing a pretty tough winter. The heating bills are going through the roof, and saying, in 5 years' time, your bills will be cheaper. Yeah. A lot of people are like, well, why can't I have cheaper bills now? And yes, it is unsustainable. We can't carry on in a situation where bills go up every winter by more than people can afford, and government has to come in and subsidise it. We need to move to permanent, cheaper, cleaner energy. But I do think the time that takes is going to be really, really difficult.
And on that point, I think the messaging around Great British Energy, people are the general population under the impression that it is an energy supply company. Well, it's not. It's an entity investment vehicle. And we need to make that, well, the Labour government needs to make that very clear to people that this is not a new power company. As well as that, the 131 projects that were signed off last week in the auctions for clean energy, those were started in March under a Conservative government, and Ed Miliband was very keen to take full credit for those. But they cost 1.5 billion. The winter fuel allowance cost 1.4 billion. So Labour is effectively net zero means netting off clean energy against pensioners.
Well, it's about long-term investment and having to fill a black hole that you left behind.
Since you've made that contrast with means testing, segue, yes, to use the jargon in the industry, let me just show you the Guardian headline. Starmer to face test next week because there's going to be a vote as MPs vote on limiting winter fuel allowance. Polly, are you comfortable with the idea of means testing the winter fuel payments, which will mean millions of pensioners losing that money?
Nobody wants to do this.
But
nobody wants to do this.
The government's chosen to.
We have been forced to because of the consequences of the big 22 billion black hole that's been left to us by the previous
public
government.
sector pay rises are now at the expense of pensioners.
I think if you don't want to cut waiting lists and pay nurses properly and talk to the nurses that I speak to who get food bank parcels because they're struggling.
Speak to the people in my constituency. I've had more communication about winter fuel payment than anything else in the last 2 weeks.
Pay review body's recommendation to nurses and doctors, and we have fulfilled that obligation. We are a grown-up government that sits down around the table and negotiates with trade unions rather than turns their back.
With no conditions.
Well, hang on, Ben.
That's absolutely not true.
Do you want the government to reverse this? You don't want them to press ahead with this?
I do not want the government to press ahead with the winter fuel payment.
Let's just show you a clip of Kemi Badenoch, whom I understand you are supporting in the leadership contest. This is from 2022, in the last leadership contest, talking about this subject. Come back.
There is a lot of dead weight in how we run government. I have people in my constituency telling me that they don't need the winter fuel payments that we give them because they can afford it. Why do we not have a more sophisticated mechanism for means testing? Those are the sort of long-term things which government should be doing, which we haven't been doing because we're focusing always on the short term, on the news headlines for tomorrow.
Kemi Badenoch seems to be backing the government's policy.
I don't agree with the current cliff edge that we have in terms of those who are on pension credits get the winter fuel payment. Everybody else, if you're £1 over and the pension credit limit is not very high, do not get anything. And that is the mistake that's being made, that there are 84% of pensioners living in poverty will not be entitled to.
But, I mean, a lot of Conservatives feel the same as you. But what do you make of what Kemi Badenoch has just said? I mean, she's a very senior politician in the party. She's running to be the leader of the Conservative Party. She thinks perhaps it should be looked at.
I mean, that was 2 years ago. You can find tweets from Rachel Reeves saying that she would protect pensions and protect the winter fuel payment. So I don't think that we can take things from years gone by and use them now as ammunition.
How difficult is this vote going to be for Labour?
For Labour, I think it's going to be. I mean, the vote itself may not be enormously difficult. You've got a lot of new MPs who don't want to, you know, get themselves on the wrong side of the whip. You've got a lot of people, you know, anxious not to make trouble for Keir Starmer. But I think in terms of the public, you know, it's not just, it won't just be Ben's postbag that's full of letters from people complaining about this. And it won't just be, you know, there are a lot of people who are going to be in genuine hardship. I mean, first time for everything, but I actually agree with Kemi. There are people who get this payment that don't need it and, you know, are spending it on your winter holidays, you know, that's fine. But the trouble with this measure is that it comes down in the wrong place. It cuts, you know, it's too close to the bone. What you need is some means, maybe you tax the winter fuel payment. Maybe you take winter fuel payment away from people in higher council tax bands. So there are ways of targeting wealthier pensioners and not targeting people who really can't afford this. But that's not what Rachel Reeves chose to do. Now we're going to see whether the government can be flexible. It's a test of both Keir Starmer's agility, I think. You know, he's very good at setting a plan and sticking to it. That may not be the right thing to do this time. But it's also a test of the relationship between Starmer and Rachel Reeves, I think. You know, this is Reeves' first really big, difficult, controversial decision as Chancellor. She's taken a lot of heat for it. You know, how much do they trust each other? How willing is he to assume that you know, that she's got this one right and they can ride it out? Because the trouble with, you know, only going for the richer pensioners is it doesn't raise nearly so much money. You know, you're talking about maybe a couple of $100 million rather than 1.5 billion. Liam, you've got to find that somewhere else.
Sorry, Gary. It's the age-old debate in welfare policy, isn't it? It goes right back to Beveridge. Means testing on the one hand, which means cliff edges that we've talked about, and I agree, we need tapers, and this pension credit cliff edge is in the wrong part of the income distribution, versus universal benefits when everyone gets it, and a lot of people end up spending their winter fuel payment on wine or skiing holidays, certainly in an affluent constituency like North West Essex, where Kemi Badenoch is. One thing I'd say about this is that, look, I remember going back to the early days of the Blair government. It won't do the party whips any harm in their own minds to have a bit of a bust-up with the left of the Labour Party, to show people, to show financial markets that the Labour leadership isn't totally, you know, in hock to the left of their party. That's just basic politics. That's partly what's going on. But the other thing I'd say briefly, Joe, it goes back to our last discussion about energy. This is a winter fuel payment which helps pensioners with their energy bills, but our energy bills, because we haven't got the guts to talk openly about the cost of renewables in this country, we just whack the subsidies for renewables on people's fuel bills, including pensioners' fuel bills. And unfortunately, that is what we call in economics regressive. It harms the poor most disproportionately because lower income households spend more of their income on fuel, on food, and so on. So a subsidy for renewable companies on bills is deeply disadvantageous to the poor.
Leaving ourselves open to Putin's oil and gas is what causes the price spikes.
A little pause from the studio. Let's go into the chamber because we have got Prime Minister's questions coming up in a few minutes' time. It is the first Prime Minister's question since Parliament has returned between Rishi Sunak and Prime Minister Keir Starmer. And it does seem as if the honeymoon is over, if it ever began, for Keir Starmer, Polly, because his approval ratings have dropped quite a bit, actually, within weeks of Labour winning that election. Let me just show you a couple of the headlines. The Guardian: public approves response to riots, but Starmer's appeal fades, new poll shows. We can show you this in The Telegraph: Starmer's approval rating at lowest on record amid cronyism scandal. And The Express: Keir Starmer's popularity plunges to record low after winter fuel payments betrayal, which we have just been discussing. Polly, why do you think it is his popularity's dipped?
Well, I have to say, you don't come into politics to be popular. You definitely
Thank goodness, hey?
I was going to say, it's definitely the wrong gig for you if that's what you're here for. I think,
but why, do you think?
Remember, Keir Starmer is here for service and for being able to get stuff done. And it is about being serious and about the long-term decisions. And sometimes you just have to take the knocks when they come and roll with those punches, because ultimately we need to be able to get to a better place on all of these things. There has been some big things that have happened this summer. The riots, and it's interesting that the approval rating for him on dealing with those has been quite considerable. But we also know that when you make unpopular decisions, who knew? You become unpopular.
Like
but things will not necessarily stay like that, and people will start to see the results of big, difficult decisions as things get better.
So how would you explain the cronyism then?
What about it?
In terms of the impact it's had on his popularity?
I'm really not taking any lectures from the Tories.
I wasn't.
I'm
asking you about your government.
You might not be, but
you are the
you've
party
also
in
got a
government.
leadership.
Don't talk over each other. Talk to each other if you
You've
can.
got a leadership contest where people who will have to make some decisions about how they're going to defend their record in government, including when and how you made some cronyist decisions about who should be appointed to senior institutions. And I don't want to take any lectures about cronyism.
But if you're not going to take any lectures, as you put it, from a Conservative MP, answer the question, though, more broadly, Polly, about this row over appointments. Were you surprised and taken aback? It seemed as if Keir Starmer himself was taken aback by the criticism of political appointees to civil service roles.
Well, look, as far as I'm aware, all the processes were followed, and people have ended up in the roles that they have done.
Donations weren't declared.
Look, as far as I'm aware, these people have got jobs that they're entitled to earn, to be in, and that is what the decision has been. Now, I know that the particular person you're talking about in the Treasury is no longer having a paid role, and that may well be the best.
And it is being looked into by Kezia Stewart. I mean, there is a review into this. Are you surprised that, despite the fact that headline said that Keir Starmer had done a pretty good job in terms of the response to the riots, that still popularity sank a bit?
It's really noticeable that if you look at the week-by-week trackers, it's not during the riots that it goes wrong. It's literally, it goes off a cliff after the emergency budget statement at the end of July. I think it really has less. I don't think it's to do with the response to the riots, when most people felt the Prime Minister did roughly what they kind of expected the Prime Minister to do. And I don't think it's rights or wrongs of the cronyism row side. I don't think people are going, right, that's it. Wahid Ali had a plaster Downing Street. That's it. I'm never voting for them again. You know, it really was about decisions that hit people in the pocket, you know, and people thought, hang on, either thought, perhaps on the left thought, I really hope Labour in government wasn't going to do things like that, or on the right thought, whoa, they said they're putting up taxes. That's exactly what I was afraid of.
We may have a minute or two more, and just to remind our viewers, after Prime Minister's questions, which we will of course take live and in full, there will be that Prime Ministerial statement from Keir Starmer on the Grenfell Tower fire report that we have spoken about in the programme. Just to go back, though, briefly to the Tory leadership contest, Ben, why are you backing Kemi Badenoch?
Kemi is someone who I firmly believe in. I've known her for a number of years. She's helped me in my progression into Parliament. But I think ultimately she is the very best person to stand up to Starmer and face down Farage.
Let's hear PMQs.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will want to congratulate our Team GB Olympic and Paralympic athletes and support staff for their outstanding achievements so far. Mr. Speaker, yesterday's incident in the Channel was shocking and deeply tragic, and our thoughts are with all those who've lost their lives and their families. We must have a renewed determination to end this. And Mr. Speaker, the chair of the Grenfell Tower inquiry, Sir Martin Morbick, has today published the inquiry's Phase 2 report. And I know that the whole House will be, thoughts of the House will be with the bereaved and the survivors of the Grenfell Tower tragedy and the residents in the immediate community. I will be making a statement shortly after PMQS today. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later.
Bill Esterson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself with the Prime Minister's remarks about the loss of life in the Channel and about Grenfell? The latest suicide figures are a sobering reminder of the misery caused by mental ill health. McGall Health Park in my constituency is a centre of excellence with high, medium and low security hospitals on the same site. The staff do an amazing job, but demand has gone through the roof, especially since the pandemic. Does my right honourable friend agree that it is essential that we have the same level of priority for mental health care and physical health care in this country?
Yes, and I thank my honourable friend for raising this critical issue. I think so many are affected by the tragedy of suicide. I'm pleased to hear about the work that he refers to, but 1 million people are not getting the support, the mental health support that they need. And that is why we will recruit 8,500 mental health workers to treat adults and children, and bring forward legislation to modernise the Mental Health Act, an act which I think is well overdue for modernisation. Thank you.
We come to the Leader of the Opposition, Rishi Sunak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I join with the Prime Minister in paying tribute to the Grenfell community? And we're going to rightly discuss that important issue shortly after PMQs. Can I also join him in congratulating our record-breaking Olympians and Paralympians on everything that they have achieved? And lastly, could I just pay tribute to the hard work, bravery and dedication of our police? This summer, in challenging circumstances, they served our communities commendably and kept us all safe. Now, Mr. Speaker, government is about making choices, and the new Prime Minister has made a choice. He has chosen to take the winter fuel allowance away from low-income pensioners and give that money to certain unionised workforces in inflation-busting pay rises. So can I just ask the Prime Minister, why did he choose train drivers over Britain's vulnerable pensioners?
Mr. Speaker, this government was elected to clear up the mess left by the party opposition and to bring about the change that the country desperately needs. Our first job was to audit the books, and what we found was a £22 billion black hole. Well, it's no good them complaining. Richard Hughes, the chair of the OBR, was very clear. He described it as one of the largest year-over overspends against forecast outside of the pandemic. His words. So we've had to take tough decisions to stabilise the economy and repair the damage, including targeting winter fuel payments whilst protecting pensioners. 800,000 pensioners are not taking up pension credit. We intend to turn that around. We're going to align housing benefit and pension credit, something the previous government deferred year after year after year. And because of our commitment to the triple lock, pensions are projected to increase by over £1,000 in the next 5 years.
Rishi Sunak.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister also inherited inflation back at target, interest rates being cut, unemployment low, and indeed the fastest growing economy in the G7, Mr. Speaker. But that's not the point, because the Prime Minister now has to start taking responsibility for his own decision. And if, as he says, the public finances are a priority, it was his decision, and his decision alone, to award a train driver on £65,000 a pay rise of almost £10,000. And it was also his decision that a pensioner living on just £13,000 will have their winter fuel allowance removed. So can the Prime Minister explain to Britain's low-income pensioners why he has taken money away from them whilst at the same time given more money to highly paid train drivers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we spent the whole election with him trying to tell the country that everything was fine, and this is the result they got. A massive mandate on this side to change the country. And if he carries on pretending everything is fine for ordinary people across the country, they're going to be there for a very, very long time. And I remind him that we inherited absolute chaos from the party opposite. We lost an average of 3 million working days a year to strikes under his watch. And you cannot fix the economy if the trains don't work, and you can't fix the economy if the NHS isn't working. And when it comes to winter fuel payments, they're having a competition, as I understand. They're going to be voting later on today. Well, his shadow housing minister, we found this. She's the favourite, I think. Some of them will be probably voting for her this afternoon. She said, her words, "I have people in my constituency telling me they don't need winter fuel payments. Why do we not have a more sophisticated mechanism for mean testing?" That's their favourite, I think, in the contest that they are having.
Mr. Speaker, again, the Prime Minister talked about the public finances. The UK's public finances are more robust than almost that of any other major advanced economy. Here we have it. He inherited a lower deficit than France, America, Italy.
Order. When I do point you to be quiet, I do mean it. I don't need a reaction back like that. Rishi.
Well, the UK currently has a lower deficit than France, America, Italy and Japan. It has the second lowest debt in the entire G7. And he opposed every difficult decision that we took to deliver that. So I certainly am not going to take any lectures from him on that score. But he talked about protecting ordinary people. Well, last year, under the Conservative government, a low-income pensioner with just £13,000 received not only the winter fuel payment, but also hundreds of pounds of additional cost of living support, both of which he has now scrapped. Age UK have said cutting the winter fuel allowance is the wrong policy. And only this morning, we've learned that the vast majority of the poorest pensioners in poverty, are going to see that vital support removed. So can he tell the House, very specifically to the pensioners that are watching, how much less support a pensioner on £13,000 will receive this winter?
He talks about tough decisions. It's tough to inherit £22 billion black hole, which the OBR did not need. That is the inheritance. That's what they left. Now, back when they were in government, they'd have pretended it wasn't there. They'd have walked past it, put it in the long grass. We're not going to do that because we were elected to change this country for the better and stabilise our economy. No Prime Minister wants to do what we have to do in relation to the winter fuel allowance, but we have to take the tough decision to stabilise our economy to ensure that we can grow it for the future. And as I've said, we are working hard on pension credit. We're allowing housing benefits, which they didn't do for years, and over 5 years, it's a projected increase of up to £1,000 for those on pensions. We are tough decisions that they done.
The government doesn't have to choose to take money off low-income pensioners in order to give it to highly paid train drivers. That is a choice that he has made, and it will be clear to any pensioners watching that he simply can't explain why he has made that choice. But, Mr. Speaker, turning to another important issue, the government has suspended 30 of the UK's 350 arms export licences to Israel. It's a decision that the Chief Rabbi says beggars belief and will encourage our shared enemies. Can the Prime Minister therefore explain how his decision will help to secure the release of the 101 hostages still being held by Hamas?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I start by saying I think the whole House will be shocked by the horrific killing of 6 hostages in the last
few days. And I know I speak for the whole House when I say that. The remaining hostages must be released, and we need a ceasefire to ensure that that can happen, that aid desperately needed can get into the region, and we can begin the path to a two-state solution. Now, he asks how we arrived at this decision. He knows very well, because the legal framework is clear. The latest guidance was issued in 2021 under his government. And that means that licences have to be kept under review, as they were by his government. And I think he probably knows the advice that was given to his government. He understands the framework. We've carried out the review in the same way and come to a clear legal conclusion, and shared that conclusion, the assessment, with Parliament. We will, of course, continue to stand by Israel's right to self-defence, but it is important that we are a country committed to the international rule of law. That gives us the strength of argument with our allies on important issues. This is a difficult issue, I recognise that, but it's a legal decision, not a policy decision. And the Prime Minister knows the framework, and they issued the guidance, they know what the test is, that test has been assessed, we've come to a conclusion, and we've put that before the House to consider.
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the Prime Minister's answer, but he'll know that decisions like this also have important and broader geopolitical implications. And he mentioned allies. It's essential that we maintain transatlantic unity in the face of terrorist threats and avoid any perception of splits between our two nations. So can he therefore update the House or tell the House what engagement he had with the United States prior to taking this significant decision?
Prime Minister.
I acknowledge the importance of working with our allies on all issues, as we have been doing, as I was able to make very clear at the NATO summit that I attended in the early summer. And of course, as he would expect, as the House would expect, we have talked this through with our allies. They understand. They have a different legal system. That is the point they made. It chunters from the. This is a serious issue. It requires serious consideration. And the Prime Minister knows the legal framework. He knows the legal framework very well. He also knows that applying that framework, the facts of that framework, and arriving at a decision does not permit me to simply then say I'm not going to implement the legal decision and conclusion that's been reached. I don't think he's really inviting me to do that.
Mr. Speaker, not only do these decisions have geopolitical consequences, but they also have emotional ones too. And the Prime Minister took this action on the very same day as the funerals of Israeli hostages murdered by Hamas. It's something that the Board of Deputies described as a terrible, terrible message to be sending. And I hope the Prime Minister understands the hurt that has been caused, and can he take this opportunity to reassure Israel and the Jewish community that the United Kingdom and this House stands behind Israel and its right to self-defence.
Prime Minister.
Let me be very clear about that. I've said it before, I'll say it again. We absolutely recognise and support Israel's right to self-defence and have taken action in support of that right of self-defence. And I've made that repeatedly clear in all of my engagements with Israel across the region and with all of our allies. I absolutely stand by that. But in relation to licences, this isn't an Israel issue. It's the framework for all licences that have to be kept under review. It's the same test for all licences, as the Prime Minister knows. And having applied the law to the facts and come to a legal conclusion, I don't think the Prime Minister is really inviting me to put that to one side. We have to, the Leader of the Opposition. This is a serious issue. We either comply with international law or we don't. And we only have strength in our arguments because we comply with international law. I appreciate the party opposite didn't think that international law mattered, and that's why we got into the pickle that we did.
Lloyd Hatton.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Home Office's decision to close the Bibby Stockholm barge in my constituency. We all know this barge is a gimmick. First, it arrived late. Second, it cost the taxpayer a fortune. Third, it was laden with fire and disease risks. And fourth, it likely contributed to the death of a 27-year-old asylum seeker on board. So can the Prime Minister reassure my constituents that this unworkable gimmick and similar unworkable gimmicks will be closed down as we clear up the mess from the party opposite?
I thank my honourable friend for the question. Unlike the party opposite, we won't waste money on gimmicks. And that's why within days we ended the Rwanda scheme, we announced the launch of the Border Security Force, and we're preparing legislation to introduce counter-terrorism powers to tackle gangs. And in the first 2 months, we've removed more than 400 people on planes who had no right to be here. Compare that with the 4 volunteers sent to Rwanda that cost £700 million. This is a government of service, not a government of gimmicks.
Here comes the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Shrub Davy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I echo the Prime Minister's words about the terrible tragedy at Grenfell, welcome the inquiry and look forward to the statement we'll discuss shortly. Mr. Speaker, for the last 18 years, Norman has been a full-time carer for his wife, Ros, who has MS and Alzheimer's disease. Early this year, he was forced to go back to work to earn the extra money for the cost of caring for his wife. As their income is just a few £100s above the limit for pension credit, they're set to lose their winter fuel allowance unless the Prime Minister listens to these benches and others and changes this plan. So, if he doesn't, what advice does the Prime Minister have to Norman and Ros and millions of struggling pensioners as they face rising heating bills this winter?
Prime Minister.
I thank the honourable member for raising that important question. I know how much he, both politically and personally, has championed carers. We have taken a difficult decision, and I'm not pretending it's not a difficult decision. Of course it's a difficult decision, because we have to stabilise the economy. We have to stabilise the economy. We went through, the first thing the Chancellor did was an audit. She found £22 billion worth of unfunded spending commitments. We can't walk past that. We can't pretend it doesn't exist. That's what the last government did. We have to take tough decisions. We will put all the support in that we can, obviously talk to the learned gentleman about this, but we have to take the tough decisions in relation to this. They walked away from those decisions. That what got us into the mess in the first place. You can't grow your economy, you can't fix your economy unless you stabilise it first.
Ed Davey.
Can I say to the Prime Minister, we recognise the appalling financial problems left to him by the last Conservative government, but can I say no one understands the difficult decisions you need to take to balance the books as unpaid family carers like Norman. So many millions of pensioners have struggled over recent years thanks to the last government. The number of pensioners who can't afford to heat their homes has doubled since 2019. So will the Prime Minister support our campaign for more urgent action to invest in insulation and renewables so we can help pensioners and all families make it cheaper to heat their homes every winter?
Yes, of course. And I remind him that there are 800,000 pensioners who are not claiming pension credit, which of course then deals with the winter payment allowance. And so that's why we are taking so much care to ensure that we can get them onto pension credit. Again, aligning housing benefit with pension credit, something they left undone for years, will make a massive difference. And of course the triple lock, which over 5 years will mean pensions are expected to rise by up to £1,000.
Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 4 years ago, the previous government ordered a review into the hormone pregnancy test drug Primados and found that the drug had caused avoidable harm. Primados was given to women in the 1960s and the 70s and resulted in many babies being born with severe disabilities. For the last 12 years, I have stood in this Parliament and pleaded with the last government repeatedly to do the right thing. So I ask the Prime Minister today will he commit to take a fresh approach to this issue, and will he meet with me and the campaigner Marie Lyon to discuss how we can give closure to the families who have been denied justice for the last 50 years?
Well, I thank her for that question and for her work on the APPG. I am sympathetic to the families who believe their children suffered from these tests and committed to reviewing any new evidence which comes to light. Mr. Speaker, at the moment the Health Department is reviewing a publication from Professor Danielson and we'll follow the results of that review. And I'm happy to ensure that the Health Minister does meet her to discuss this further.
Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for visiting Northern Ireland within the last fortnight, and particularly for the time he spent with injured officers of the Police Service of Northern Ireland. He will know of their courage, but he will also know of the dogged determination of our Chief Constable, John Boucher, in his desire to see adequate resourcing for his officers who not only stand for law and order in Northern Ireland, but stand in the face of racism, of violence and of an ongoing national security threat from dissident Republicans. So can I therefore ask him to earnestly and urgently engage in a discussion about uplifting the national security grant afforded to the Police Service of Northern Ireland and ensure that the PSNI can face the challenges that we need them to face head on?
Well, I thank him for that question, and it was important for me to go to Belfast to meet the injured officers and to say simply thank you for what they are doing and, of course, the impact it has on their families. I do recognise the difficult financial position the PSNI faces, and the Chief Constable and I have spoken about this on more than one occasion, as you would expect. I mean, predominantly, it's for the Justice Minister and the Executive to set the PSNI's budget, and an operational matter for the Chief Constable in relation to how he allocates that. But I have been talking to him about what further support might be possible, because I do realise just how important it is to him and to the PSNI and to Northern Ireland more generally.
Emma Foodie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, ticket-selling websites like Ticketmaster left millions of Oasis fans furious. But worse still came minutes later when tickets started to be relisted online for thousands of pounds. This profiteering at fans' expense is not a one-off. The cooperative party's campaigning for a new licensing body with real teeth to tackle this online touting. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that fans should be at the heart of live music and that urgent action is needed to protect fans against this horrid practice?
Yes, I do. And firstly, it's great that Oasis are back together. I think, from what I've determined, about half the country is probably queuing for tickets over the weekend. But it is depressing to hear of price hikes. I'm committed to putting fans at the heart of music and end extortionate price resales, and we're starting a consultation to work out how best we can do this.
Harriet Cross.
Mr. Speaker, Offshore Energies UK reports that the government's proposed windfall tax increases will cost our economy £13 billion, risk 35,000 jobs and see investment in the North Sea slashed from £14.1 billion to just £2.3 billion by 2029. It also suggests that there's going to be a £12 billion cost in tax revenues. How does this proposal chime with the Prime Minister's goal of economic growth? And will he reverse this tax increase, which industry leaders are calling economic suicide for the oil and gas sector?
Mr. Speaker, we're committed to the transition that is necessary in relation to energy to renewables, which will lead to cheaper energy, energy independence and the jobs of the future. But let me be clear, oil and gas will play its part for many years to come, and that's why we've been really clear about the support that we have for oil and gas. And I'm sure she and others will want to celebrate the fact that just this week, Contracts for Difference secured a record 131 new clean energy projects, enough to power 11 million homes, and that is the jobs of the future.
Luke Chalmers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will remember visiting my constituency in June, where we toured Germany Beck, a fantastic development of 600 new homes. But because of Tory dither and delay, it took the best part of a decade for that site to get through planning. You can grumble all you want, but my families are paying the price for their mistakes. Can the Prime Minister reassure me that this government will speed up the planning process so we can get more homes built, and will one of his ministers meet with me to discuss the housing crisis in York?
Yes, I remember that visit well, and was struck by the delays in planning because the system was broken by the previous government. We will deliver 1.5 million new homes, Mr. Speaker, drive economic growth and fulfil the dream of home ownership, shattered for 14 years under the former government. And that means changing the planning rules, a tough decision they were not prepared to make that happen and to grow our economy. Thank you.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, SSE, the operators of the new Viking Energy wind farm in Shetland, were paid £2 million in order not to generate any electricity from it. Is there not something badly wrong with an energy market that pays big corporates not to produce electricity while the people living amongst the turbines endure some of the highest levels of fuel poverty in the country? So will the Prime Minister and the Government now look seriously at the idea of an islands tariff, so that islands communities such as those represented by me and by his honourable friend from the Helen and the Near may see some genuine benefit for the community from hosting renewable energy developments such as this?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for raising this issue, which is obviously a considerable concern to him and his constituents. The National Grid, as he knows, does balance the grid by occasionally requesting some generators to stop when there's not enough capacity on the network. That's not good enough. That's not acceptable for the reasons set out in his question. It's a problem that wasn't fixed over the last 14 years, but a problem we are determined to fix as we go forward. And I will make sure that a relevant minister speaks to him about the particular issue in his constituency.
Dr. Peter Prinsley.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. As a surgeon from East Anglia, I welcome the measures the new government has taken to fulfil its mission to fix the NHS. In my constituency of Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket, the West Suffolk Hospital is badly affected by RAC. Just like the James Paget Hospital in Norfolk, where I've worked for nearly 30 years. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that the RAC hospitals must be priorities as the new government undertakes its review of the new hospital programme?
I thank him for his question, and also he brings huge expertise to this area. We have to reset the new hospital programme and put it on a sustainable footing. The last government promised 40 new hospitals. The problem is there weren't 40, they weren't new, and some of them weren't even hospitals. Hospitals with RAC will, of course, including West Suffolk Hospital, must be a priority. So we're reviewing the programme, and the Secretary of State will update Parliament as soon as possible.
Richard.
After 14 miserable years of the worst Tory government in modern times, the best this Prime Minister can offer the British people is things can only get worse. Well, for him and his calamitous opinion ratings, that's probably true. But why does he think he has such an unprecedented fall in his popularity? Is it his attacks on the pensioners? Is it leaving children in poverty? Is it the re-emergence of Labour cronyism? Or is it because his austerity is even worse than the Conservative variety?
I remember when they used to sit here. It's a long way up, and there's very few of them, so I don't think we need lectures on popularity and non-election.
Yes, MP. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome this week's news on the changes, the government plans around Ofsted, including the removal of single-word judgments. This is great news for head teachers in West Lancashire who've raised this issue with me, along with other issues around Ofsted, and for parents who will have more transparency on the performance of schools. How does the Prime Minister see these changes developing a more positive relationship between Ofsted, government and schools, and improving standards so that all our young people can thrive?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're committed to the best education for every child, whatever their background and wherever they come from. The current single grade does not work well, and that's why we're going to have a richer dashboard, which will give parents more information and allow intervention more quickly, and that's why it's been so warmly welcomed across the country.
Rebecca Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am new to this House, but I know that we all want our pensioners to live with dignity and security. In my constituency of Reigate, there are around 17,000 pensioners expected to lose their winter fuel payment this year. Of most concern are those just above the pension credit threshold who will be hardest hit. Would the Prime Minister give consideration to broadening the eligibility for the winter fuel payment so that those low-income pensioners who rely on it to stay warm can continue to benefit?
Can I welcome her to her place? And Reigate is obviously a place I know very well, as she knows. But the reality is this decision has been taken because of the £22 billion black card. So responsibility for the decision lies with the party that broke the economy. There's a reason we have a mandate for change, and there's a reason that this party is now sitting there, and that's because they broke the economy. And I'm not going to apologise for clearing up the mess that they left.
Deirdre Costigan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 14 years of Conservative failure, crime and street drinking now blight areas of Southall Town Centre, West Ealing and Hanwell Broadway in my constituency of Ealing Southall. So can the Prime Minister set out how his government will take action to ensure our town centres are transformed into places where my constituency can finally feel safe again?
Thank you. This is an important issue, Mr. Speaker, and I've heard too many people say that antisocial behaviour is some sort of low-level issue. It really impacts lives across the country. We have to tackle it, and that's why we will put more police on the streets. We will have more effective powers to deal with antisocial behaviour, and we'll introduce Young Futures programmes to divert young people who are getting into trouble.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Question number 14, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Schools Minister will be happy to visit his constituency.
Sir Ashley Fox.
I thank the Prime Minister for his answer. Haygrove School is one of the top-performing schools in Somerset. It is unfortunately one of those built by Caledonian Modular and now condemned as unsafe. So I'm grateful for the meeting with the Schools Minister. But can the Prime Minister give Haygrove School and the other schools affected an assurance that they will be rebuilt and quickly? Because those pupils and staff are still working in porter cabins.
I'm grateful. I do recognise how serious an issue this is and why he raises it. It is of real importance. The Minister will visit, and the Department of Education is pursuing all available avenues for redress against the parties responsible for the issues at the school. But I will make sure that the Minister is fully briefed and has a full discussion about this when that visit takes place.
Sean Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm a proud MP for a new town, but over the last 14 years, Telford has lost its A&E. Less police officers, GPs, teachers per head, and we've also had 40% cuts to our local government budgets. Will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, back places like Telford rather than overlook us, as has been the case over these last 14 years?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for raising this issue, and I know he'll be a really strong champion for his constituency. We're a government that will be based on actions, not slogans, and that's why we'll have local growth plans, improve public services and invest in transport links. We will fix the mess that they left after 14 years, and we will devolve power to those with skin in the game.
Tim Farron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the last 5 years, there have been 10 fatal accidents on the A66 along the short stretch in the Eden Valley in Westmoreland. So in our community, we are naturally deeply concerned that the vital A66 Northern Transpennine project, which would make the roads considerably safer, has been put under review by this government. Will the Prime Minister take the opportunity now and end this uncertainty today, commit to this project and save lives?
I thank him for raising this question about fatalities on roads, and that is a very serious issue in relation to the A66 and other roads across the country. We have inherited a broken economy. We have to review what we're spending money on. We're going through that review and we'll report back as soon as we can.
Gurinder Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister join me in sending condolences to the family of Jazia Koch, a 13-year-old boy who was stabbed and tragically killed in my constituency? Does the Prime Minister share my concerns about the prevalence of young people carrying knives, and what more can be done to end this scourge that is destroying families and communities?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure I speak for the whole House in saying our thoughts are with Jazia's family at this difficult time. This is tragic, it is senseless, and the age just absolutely makes one shudder. Our mission is to halve knife crime. Zombie-style knives and zombie-style machetes will be banned from the 24th of September, and there'll be a surrender scheme which has been started on 26th of August. And we are doing a rapid review on online sale of knives, which is often a problem in these cases. So we will pursue that with determination, and I invite everybody across the House, in light of this and so many other tragic cases, to join with us on that mission.
Final question, Karen Bradley.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Those of us from Staffordshire Moorlands are immensely proud of our beautiful area and unique identity. So can the Prime Minister guarantee that we will not be forced into a devolution deal or local government reorganisation against our will?
I think it's very important that local people have a say, but it's equally important that we do devolve to those who have skin in the game. And one of the ways in which we can restart our economy is making sure that those with skin in the game take the decisions that are relevant to them and their area.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. I'll let those who are leaving the chamber leave quickly before we start the statement.
That is the end of Prime Minister's questions. As you heard there from the Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, he is saying that people who need to leave the Commons chamber, MPs who have to go, should do so now. You can see them flowing out. But in a few moments' time, we will hear from the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, as he gives his statement in response to the publication of the second and final report on the Grenfell Tower fire disaster. It is 7 years since that disaster claimed 72 lives. It was the worst residential fire since the Second World War, and justice has yet to be done, in the words of much of the testimony that we have heard from both survivors and families of the victims. Let's go back into the chamber.
Mr. Speaker, this morning, Sir Martin Morbick published the final report of the Grenfell Tower inquiry. But I'm sure the whole House will join me in thanking him, the members of the inquiry and the whole team for their dedicated work. Mr. Speaker, I want to speak directly to the bereaved families, the survivors and those in the immediate Grenfell community, some of whom are with us in the gallery today. Sir Martin concluded this morning, and I'm afraid there's no way of repeating this that won't be painful. He said the simple truth is that the deaths that occurred were all avoidable, and that those who lived in the tower were badly failed over a number of years and in a number of different ways by, as the report lays out in full, just about every institution responsible for ensuring their safety. Mr. Speaker, in the face of an injustice so painful, so deserving of anger, words can begin to lose their meaning. 7 years still waiting for the justice that you deserve. I want to say very clearly on behalf of the country, you've been let down so badly, before, during and in the aftermath of this tragedy. And while Sir Martin sets out a catalogue of appalling industry failures, for which there must now be full accountability, he also finds, and I quote, decades of failure by central government. He concludes that in the years between the fire at Knowsley Heights in 1991 and the fire at Grenfell Tower in 2017, there were many opportunities for the government to identify the risks posed by the use of combustible cladding panels and insulation. And he concludes, and I quote, by 2016, the department was well aware of those risks, but failed to act on what they knew. He further finds that the department itself was poorly run, and the government's deregulatory agenda dominated the department's thinking to such an extent that even matters affecting the safety of life were ignored, delayed, or disregarded. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to start with an apology on behalf of the British state to each and every one of you, and indeed to all of the families affected by this tragedy. It should never have happened. The country failed to discharge its most fundamental duty, to protect you and your loved ones, the people that we are here to serve, and I am deeply sorry. I also want to express my admiration for the strength it must have taken to relive these events when giving your evidence to the inquiry, and indeed to see written down today the circumstances that led to the death of your loved ones. After all you've been through, you may feel you're always one step away from another betrayal. I get that, and I know I cannot change that with just words today. But what I can say is I listened carefully to one of the members of the inquiry, Ali Akbar, this morning, who said this: what is needed is for those with responsibility for building safety to reflect and to treat Grenfell as a touchstone in all that they do in the future. Mr. Speaker, I consider myself someone responsible for building safety, and that is exactly what I will do and what I'll demand of this government. Mr. Speaker, today is a
We'll leave the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, continuing to...
families of Grenfell, but also a moment to reflect on the state of social justice in our country, and a chance for this government of service to turn the page. Because this tragedy poses fundamental questions about the kind of country we are, a country where the voices of working class people and those of colour have been repeatedly ignored and dismissed. A country where tenants of a social housing block in one of the richest parts of the land are treated like second-class citizens, shamefully dismissed, in the words of one survivor, as people with needs and problems not respected as citizens, as people who contribute to Britain, who are part of Britain, who belong in Britain. And Mr. Speaker, unbelievably, this continued even after the tragedy. Sir Martin highlights, and I quote, certain aspects of the response demonstrated a marked lack of respect for human decency and dignity, and left many of those immediately affected feeling abandoned by authority and utterly helpless. Mr. Speaker, that alone should make anyone who feels any affinity towards justice bristle with anger. But Sir Martin continues. He finds, and these are his words, Mr. Speaker, systematic dishonesty on the part of those who made and sold the rain screen cladding panels and insulation products. And he goes on to say, they engaged in deliberate and sustained strategies to manipulate the testing process, misrepresent test data, and mislead the market. Sir Martin also cites a complete failure on the part of the local authority building control over a number of years to take basic steps
to ensure that the certificates it issued were technically accurate. He finds that the work of the Building Research Establishment was marred by unprofessional conduct, inadequate practices, a lack of effective oversight, poor reporting, and a lack of scientific rigour, and that the tenant management organisation must bear a share of the blame. Its only fire safety assessor, these are his words, had misrepresented his experience and qualifications, some of which he invented, and was ill-informed to carry out fire risk assessments on buildings of the size and complexity of Grenfell Tower. He also finds a chronic lack of effective management and leadership on behalf of the London Fire Brigade, with tragic consequences on the night of the fire. Mr. Speaker, in the light of such findings, it is imperative that there is full accountability, including through the criminal justice process, and that this happens as swiftly as possible. So I can tell the House today that this government will write to all companies found by the inquiry to be part of these horrific failings as the first step to stopping them being awarded government contracts. And we will, of course, support the Metropolitan Police and the prosecutors as they complete their investigations. But, Mr. Speaker, it is vital that as we respond to this report today, we do not do or say anything that could compromise any future prosecution, because the greatest injustice of all would be for the victims and all those affected not to get the justice that they deserve. Mr. Speaker, there must also be more radical action to stop something like this from ever happening again, because one of the most extraordinary qualities of the Grenfell community is their determination to look forward. They are not only fighting for justice for themselves, they are fighting to ensure that no other community suffers as they have done. Mr. Speaker, some important reforms have taken place in the last 7 years, reforms that we supported in opposition, including banning combustible cladding, new oversight of building control, a new safety regime for all residential buildings over 18 metres, new legal requirements on social landlords, making sure fire and rescue services are trained and equipped to handle large-scale incidents, including moving from stay put to get out when needed. And we're now addressing the recommendation from St Martin's first report to introduce a new residential personal emergency evacuation plan policy for anyone whose ability to evacuate could be compromised, and funding from this from renting in social housing. Mr. Speaker, we will look at all 58 of St Martin's recommendations in detail. There will be a debate on the floor of this House. We will respond in full to the inquirer's recommendations within 6 months, and we will update Parliament annually on our progress against every commitment that we make. But there are some things I can say right now. There are still buildings today with unsafe cladding, and the speed at which this is being addressed is far, far too slow. We only have to look at the fire in Dagenham last week, a building that was still in the process of having its cladding removed. So this must be a moment of change. We will take the necessary steps to speed this up. We will be willing to force freeholders to assess their buildings and enter remediation schemes within set timetables, with a legal requirement to force action if that is what it takes. And we will set out further steps on remediation this autumn. We will also reform the construction products industry that make this fatal cladding so homes are made of safe materials. And those who compromise that safety will face the consequences. We will ensure that tenants and their leaseholders can never again be ignored, and that social landlords are held to account for the decency and safety of their homes. And as this government tackles the most acute housing crisis in living memory, building 1.5 million new homes across the country, we will ensure those homes are safe, secure, and built to the highest standards. Places of security, health and well-being that serve the needs of residents and their wider communities. Because a safe and decent home is a human right and a basic expectation, and the provision of that right should never be undermined by the reckless pursuit of greed. One of the tragedies of Grenfell is
that this is a community that nurtured so much of what we want from housing. People who had made the tower their home and were entitled to a place of safety and security, not a death trap. And yet, time and again, they were ignored. Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, I made a private visit to Grenfell Tower and laid a wreath at the memorial wall and affirmed this government's commitment to the work of the Memorial Commission, delivering a permanent memorial on the site through a process led by the Grenfell community. As I walked down that narrow staircase from the 23rd floor and looked at walls burned by 1,000-degree heat, I got just a sense of how utterly, utterly terrifying it must have been. And as I saw examples of the cladding on the outside of the building and listened to descriptions of the catastrophic and completely avoidable failures of that fatal refurbishment, I felt just a sense of the anger that now rises through that building. And it left me, Mr. Speaker, with the profound and very personal determination to make the legacy of Grenfell Tower one of the defining changes to our country that I want to make as Prime Minister. To the families, the survivors and the immediate community, we will support you now and always, especially those that were children. In the memory of your loved ones, we will deliver a generational shift in the safety and quality of housing for everyone in this country. And in the memory of Grenfell, we will change our country, not just a change in policy and regulation, although that must of course take place, but a profound shift in culture and behaviour. A rebalancing of power that gives voice and respect to every citizen, whoever they are and wherever they live. And Mr. Speaker, we will bring the full power of government to bear on this task, because that is the responsibility of service and the duty we owe to the memory of every one of the 72. And in that spirit, I commend the statement to the House.
I call the Leader of the Opposition, Rishi Sunak.
Mr. Speaker, can I start by thanking the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement, especially given the timing of Prime Minister's question time. And can I also associate myself and everyone on this side of the House with the Prime Minister's powerful words regarding the pain of the bereaved families, survivors, and all those affected by the tragic events surrounding Grenfell Tower. Many are with us today in the gallery, and I want to pay tribute to their strength and patience in waiting for this moment. It is not hyperbole to say that we would not be here today without them. It was their tenacity and strength that brought the truth to light, and for that they deserve our thanks. Their search for truth and justice is a noble one and has our full support. And whilst the Grenfell community's loss will have left a hole nothing will ever be able to fill, I hope that whatever healing is possible from today, that each and every one of them takes some small measure of it. I know they will never forget the 72 people who tragically lost their lives, and nor shall we. Today's publication, as the Prime Minister said, is, to put it bluntly, a damning indictment of over 30 years of successive state failures, stretching as far back as Knowsley Heights in 1991 and then multiple incidents from there. Sir Martin Morbick and the work of the inquiry have painted a picture of systemic indifference, failure, and in some notable cases, dishonesty and greed. Sir Martin and the team working on the inquiry are to be commended for the depth and rigour of their work. And Mr. Speaker, while such a comprehensive report as has been published today deserves to be considered in full, and I welcome the Prime Minister's commitments for time in this House to do that, there are some immediate points that I feel will command support across the House and that I'll address to the Prime Minister. First, the work to remediate and, where possible, identify new at-risk buildings must continue. If we are to meet, as I'm confident the whole House would agree, the Right Honourable former member for Maidenhead's pledge that no such tragedy could occur again. I know this task is not a simple one, and I thank the Prime Minister for recognising the importance of this issue. A significant barrier to making progress quicker is financial liability. It was an issue I was all too aware of when I became Chancellor. and why one of the first major spending decisions I made was the creation of a new £1 billion fund to pay for remediation works in public and private buildings affected by materials beyond dangerous ACM cladding. And the previous government's cladding safety scheme has ensured an additional £5.1 billion is available to support remediation work, coming from a combination of a developer contribution and a building safety levy. So I'd ask the Prime Minister and Chancellor to give due consideration to any further requests, especially with the upcoming fiscal event towards the end of October. The second point I'm confident that the Prime Minister would agree on is the need to maintain and update our legal and regulatory framework to keep pace with changes in materials, construction and supply. The last Parliament passed the Fire Safety Act in 2021, but also the Building Safety Act in 2022. And I acknowledge, as the Prime Minister said, that he worked constructively with the then government to deliver those improvements. These pieces of legislation comprehensively reformed our fire safety and building regulation regimes and ensured that a new building safety regulator was created, located in the Health and Safety Executive. But I also know that these are stepping stones towards a fire and building safety regime that remains persistently fit for purpose. And in particular, I'd urge the Prime Minister to give special attention to the recommendations in today's report, especially its call for more regular updating of approved Document B, a single regulator, a sole Secretary of State responsible to end the fragmentation of Whitehall responsibilities, and a new Chief Construction Advisor. And I want the Prime Minister to know that should he deem further legislation to support proportionate and necessary measures to protect the public, whilst protecting leaseholders from excessive costs is required, then we will work collegiately with him to deliver that. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, allied to the need for continued improvement in the legal and regulatory frameworks, this report also shines a light on the significant failures of oversight. Those responsible for ensuring the independence and rigour of testing and compliance were found by this report to have had those very things compromised. In particular, the BRE, in its work with suppliers, in part enabled what Sir Martin Morbick's report has plainly described as systemically dishonest behaviour on the part of suppliers. So I welcome the Prime Minister's commitment to continue to support the Metropolitan Police and Crown Prosecution Service in pursuing any appropriate criminal charges against a small number of developers and contractors who knowingly and fraudulently cut corners on building safety for greed and financial gain. And Mr. Speaker, I don't want to let this moment pass without also acknowledging the local failures today's report highlights, whether from the tenant management organisation responsible for the building itself, who allowed relationships with those living in Grenfell Tower to become so broken that tenants were marginalised and at worst ignored, the repeated fire safety reports that were not acted on, the lack of effective management and leadership at London Fire Brigade, and the local council, who had a lack of adequate oversight into the management and maintenance of the building and the cares and concerns of those living in it. Mr. Speaker, there will be further lessons to learn from this inquiry. There will be difficult questions for all those responsible acting over a long period of time. And I know that the Prime Minister will agree that we must approach those questions with the honesty and directness with which they deserve. And let me conclude, Mr. Speaker. At the time, the former Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead apologised to the victims for what she described as failures at a local and national level in response to the fire. I share in those same words still. I think today, however, demands more. As a Prime Minister, current or former, you are a custodian of the state. And its failures, whether on your watch or not, are something that you feel deeply. And to that end, I want to extend my deepest apologies to the families and victims of the Grenfell Tower tragedy. The state let you down, and it must never do so again. Mr. Speaker, the mission to ensure no such tragedy can ever happen again is one I know the whole House supports. But more than that, it is part of a legacy we must create and maintain so that our actions meet the full meaning of our words.
Prime Minister.
Can I thank him for the tone and the substance of his response. We do owe it to the victims, their families and the community to work together to ensure that they can get the justice that they deserve and that we make this a turning point that means that this will never happen again. There will be a debate for the whole House to participate, because I know there will be an opportunity to ask questions today, but members and honourable members will want to make substantive contributions on this tragic issue, but also, no doubt, issues of concern in their own constituencies in relation to cladding and fire safety. So we'll make sure that time is available. I welcome his approach to working jointly, as we were able to do in opposition ourselves, particularly on the remediation work, which is behind schedule, needs to speed up, and we need to do all we can on that. On the financial liability, this is obviously an issue, and we'll look across to the sufficiency of that. On the legal and regulatory framework, obviously changes have been made already. I do think further changes are going to be necessary. We'll share that with the opposition as soon as we've got some realistic proposals to put before the House, and I think if we can then join together in passing the necessary legislation as quickly as possible, that will be a mark of our determination to treat this as a turning point. And I share in his comments about criminal proceedings. Clearly we don't want to prejudice those criminal proceedings, but I don't think anybody could read this report and not be absolutely shocked at the description of some of the dishonesty. This was not just incompetence, it was dishonesty, manipulating of tests and the market. And you can't read that on the page of this report and not have a renewed determination to ensure that justice is delivered for those who deserve that justice. Thank you.
Can I just say I thank the Prime Minister for his comments about the need for caution in terms of comments relating to particular legal cases or inquest. I repeat the waiver that I granted under the sub judice rule on the 21st of June 2022. So I appeal to all members to absolutely to speak, but be cautious of what we do. I now come to the middle of the House, Diane Abbott.
Mr. Speaker, is the Prime Minister aware of how painful it must be for the Grenfell community to have that tower looming over them for 7 years, and for it to have taken 7 years to even reach this stage? Having visited Grenfell, he will be aware that the majority of the 72 that died were amongst the most marginalised and largely people of migrant heritage. Can he give an assurance that the bereaved will get all of the support they need going forward, including financial support? And can he also give an assurance that it will not take 7 years to bring those responsible to justice?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that question, and she's absolutely right to focus on the community, on the bereaved, and decisions such as the tower, the memorial, whatever it may be, must be taken in consultation with the community, and I give that absolute commitment here that we will do that. In addition, that the support that they need, because visiting, I got a sense, but a small sense, of course, for myself, as to just how painful this must have been and continues to be, and we cannot allow another 7 years to pass before we take the necessary action.
We come to the Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Prime Minister for his extremely powerful comments today and associate my party with them all. The Grenfell disaster is a tragedy that shames our whole society. The report lays bare failings of governments of all parties over decades, and on behalf of my party, I am sorry. We must all learn from it and do everything we can to change the system to prevent more horrifying tragedies like this in the future. So it's right we pause today and remember the 72 people who lost their lives, as well as the survivors and the bereaved families and friends who fought so long and so hard for justice. This is their day. They waited far too long to get to this truth, and many will remain frustrated that even after today, they'll still be waiting for justice and meaningful action. So I want to raise 3 issues of the many that the families raise.
First, to get the justice that the families crave, criminality must be investigated, tried and punished, whether it's corporate manslaughter, fraud or misconduct in public office. So will the Prime Minister confirm the police, prosecutors and courts will have all the resources they need to bring those responsible swiftly to justice? Second, what more can the Prime Minister do, can we all do for greater urgency to act on all these recommendations so this report doesn't just gather dust on a Whitehall shelf? Even now, 7 years on, essential work to make more than 2,300 buildings safe hasn't even started. Can the Prime Minister tell the House what more will be done to remove dangerous cladding as quickly as possible, forcing those responsible to pay, not the tenants and leaseholders? And finally, we must tackle the big systemic issues that come up time and again in scandals like this, from Hillsborough to Horizon to Infected Blood. Like other scandals victims, the bereaved and survivors of Grenfell have called for a duty of candour on public officials, and we welcomed its inclusion in the King's speech. So can the Prime Minister tell us when that legislation will be published and whether the duty will cover all public officials?
Well, I thank the honourable member for his response and join with him on this sense that this has taken too long and it's been too hard, and it's not unique in that respect in relation to these types of injustices. On the specific points he makes, it is really important that criminality is fully investigated, and we will give all support and resource that's necessary to the relevant authorities. In relation to the recommendations, we will respond as quickly as possible within 6 months. It's a long report. There are many recommendations, and I think it's right that we take time to look through them, to consider how they can be complied with, and then come back to the House in relation to that, and then come back on an annual basis to assess the progress that we are making and to be held to account on it. On the removal of cladding, that does need to be speeded up. There's no question about that, and measures are already being taken in relation to that. And on Hillsborough, that was in the King's speech. This duty of candour is very, very important, and we'll look again at it in light of this report, but we're determined to bring forward that legislation as quickly as we can. It's long overdue, but I do think, having looked at some of the report already, that it's worth reflecting and making sure what's in the report is incorporated into whatever law that we do bring forward. Thank you.
Joe Powell. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we've heard, it's now over 7 years since 72 people lost their lives at Grenfell Tower in North Kensington. And as we heard again today, it was entirely foreseen, entirely preventable, the result of individuals and organisations that were systematically dishonest and put profit before people's lives. And I want to pay tribute to the next of kin, bereaved and survivors, including those here today, for their resilience and strength. This is a very painful day for the community. Prime Minister, the shameless merry-go-round of buck passing that has happened for the last 7 years since Grenfell must now come to an end. So I want to thank you for your personal commitment to drive the lasting change and to hold people accountable. Can you assure me that the government will now do everything in its power to ensure that criminal prosecutions will take place as soon as possible? Can you commit to ensuring that companies identified in this report will be excluded from public contracts, held account to the full extent of the law, and pay their full weight of financial remediation for the building safety remedial work that's needed? And can he ensure that the Phase 2 recommendations for central government will be a blueprint for real change, and that implementation of those will be swift and as comprehensive as possible, so that we can really say a tragedy like Grenfell will not happen again? Prime Minister.
Thank you, and I can confirm that we will do everything to make sure there is full accountability, including criminal accountability where appropriate. I do remind the House, as Mr Speaker you have, that notwithstanding the strong findings in the report, it is the last thing now that the victims, the bereaved and the community want or need is for anything to go wrong with possible legal proceedings. So we must all bear that in mind, but I absolutely understand the sentiment. And in relation to the contracts, I stand by what I said in my statement. And I would just concur with the honourable friend on the resilience and strength of the victims, the families, the survivors and the community. It must have been really hard to give evidence to this inquiry, and it must be really hard to read the details in this long report of what happened, and even harder still to read the conclusions in relation to the failures and the dishonesty. And so we must pay respect to that resilience and strength.
Bob Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And very sadly for most of us, this report is not a surprise, because many of the things that were being said over many years have now come to fruition in these recommendations. As the Prime Minister has quite rightly alluded to, the conspiracy on testing of products is clearly going to be something that must be subject to criminal proceedings. Will he therefore look at some of the recommendations immediately that affect the government, namely bringing responsibility under one department, with one minister being responsible and answerable to this House, to make sure that action is taken, and secondly, ensuring that one single regulator is introduced to make sure that these various different aspects that were clearly wrong do not occur again?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for his question. I think it is really important. We will report back on all of the recommendations within 6 months, but if we can act more quickly in relation to some of them, then we will do that straight away. So the 6 months is to report back, but within that, if there are recommendations which we can accept and move forward, we will do that rather than waiting for the 6 month period, because I think it's very important for all the reasons that he just so powerfully put.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. May I thank the Prime Minister for his comments on the community in North Ken, which is also my community in Shepherd's Bush and Hammersmith, not only for the survivors and families of victims, but for all of those in West London. Grenfell Tower is a daily presence in our lives, in particular for those who live in the many high-rise buildings surrounding Grenfell. So will the Prime Minister ensure that all housing is built safe and made safe from the risk of fire, which his predecessors failed to do? And above all today, will he pledge that those complicit in the Grenfell fire are brought to justice, so there's no mistake as to their guilt or their punishment?
Prime Minister.
It is important there's full accountability, and that where appropriate, people are brought to justice. That is the least that the families, the survivors, the bereaved and the community deserve. And I absolutely understand the point he makes about the wider community. This has impacted the wider community, of course. I mean, hasn't he? Well knows that in his own work as the constituency MP. I saw a bit of that when I visited. There's various writings on the wall around the memorial where people have recorded their private views from the area, and it is an important read for anybody who wants to be in a position of leadership.
Sir Bernard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and also Sir Martin Warbeck, but could I refer him specifically to recommendation 113.58? After Piper Alpha, there was established an independent offshore safety investigation body. After the Paddington rail crash, we established the Independent Rail Accident Investigation Board. A former Fire and Housing Minister, Nick Rainsford, a former Chief Investigator of the AAIB, Keith Conradi, and a leading building control specialist, and I made a submission to the inquiry recommending that there should be independent incident investigation of serious building failures of this nature, which would be able to conduct an investigation far more quickly than a public inquiry and with accumulated expertise. And yet this role is left with the London Fire Brigade, which is itself heavily criticised and would therefore be conflicted in any investigation of a similar incident, which is why they weren't put in charge of investigating this incident in the first place. Could we come and see him about this very, very serious matter?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable member for raising what is a really serious issue. We will, of course, look at that recommendation. We'll report to the House, and I'll make sure that a meeting is set up for him to be able to input directly into our considerations on that particular recommendation and any others that he has concerns about.
Florence Session.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And today, first and foremost, is about the families of Grenfell and the 72 people who died. For them, today is another emotionally exhausting day. But we must remember that their fight is our fight in that fight for justice. And Mr. Speaker, Grenfell laid bare the truth, the sad truth, around the stigma attached to social housing. It's a stigma I still remember when people made assumptions because I lived on a council estate. It's the stigma attached to people who are actually from all walks of life, teachers, doctors, firefighters, people who pay their rent on time but yet are treated with that disdain by housing providers. And this damning report confirms that. It talks about stating that their voices were ignored and the safety in industries was ignored, delayed or disregarded at all levels of the government and housing sector. This is unforgivable. The Prime Minister has spoken about that culture. Will he commit to ensuring that this new government addresses that culture within our housing sector, which often treats social housing tenants as an afterthought?
Minister. She speaks very powerfully about a really important point in relation to social housing, and the report is littered with examples of disrespect, of people not being listened to, not being taken seriously. And yes, policy and regulation are in part the answer to this, but policy and regulation on their own are not the complete answer to this. There has to be that change in culture and behaviour, and turning a corner needs to mean something more than passing a new law or putting in place new guidance, much needed though that is. It means all of us adopting a different culture and behaviour, because otherwise we will be back here in I don't know how many years having the same debate again, and we cannot visit that on the victims, survivors, deceased and the communities of Grenfell.
Steve. It's a good start. Stop trying to flog everyone off fucking house. That would be a nice start, wouldn't it? Like we've been having this conversation since Thatcher. It's not fucking new. You're not scum if you're in a fucking council house. I mean, it's pretty mind-bending how the vast majority of people, in fact, everyone who had a mortgage got fucking arse clowned by Liz Truss. The government doesn't need to put up your rent. It owns the fucking house. The only people who got their rent put up, technically speaking, were people with mortgages, because your bank owns the fucking house. That's the fucking reason. You wonder why your bins don't get taken out as regularly as they used to? Because there's no fucking money. That's why. Your money goes to a bank instead of the fucking council. I mean, like, people can't fucking count or some shit? Like, if you've all got a mortgage, where's the fucking money for the council? There isn't any. You fucking clowns. Please, for the love of God, stop going around saying buy your own gaff every 5 fucking seconds. Would be fucking handy. I mean, it's just retarded. I mean, like I said, it's not even fucking new. This shit's been going on since Margaret Thatcher, who sold all the council houses, remember, and didn't bother to fucking build any since then. Every single government since we've had since Thatcher hasn't built any council homes and brainwashed everybody that they need to buy a house and there's some magical fucking ladder in the sky. The vast majority of people in Germany don't own their house. Like, we're the only country who's obsessed with owning your own fucking gaff. It's retarded. Fucking retarded. It's a house, not a fucking investment, you prick. Honestly.
Mr. Speaker, our hearts ache at the injustice and horror which befell individuals and their families at Grenfell Tower, and I would like to commend the Prime Minister for the strength and power of his remarks from the dispatch box today. Can he give a commitment that his government will continue to work constructively with the devolved governments to ensure the...
How did you get greed building a house? Because you're flogging it to somebody. Really? Greed? When was the last time you agreed with a fucking council house? You don't get it, is the fucking point. Leaseholders, they own the fucking shit and charge everybody stupid amounts of fucking rent. This is the problem. Everybody is a landlord. The only OG landlord is the government. Privatisation of fucking everything under these bastards. Like, literally, the fucking retarded privatise your water. What did they do? Put shit in your fucking river. Honestly. Privatise the fucking entire fucking industry about energy. What you get? High fucking bills. I mean, literally. Privatise the railway. What now? Everyone's on strike. Because everyone wants to make money. Don't you understand that? Money is what makes these people go round. Profits. More profits. Good for rich people. That's not what happens when you pay tax. We should not give our money by law to people, by law, to get rich. That's not how tax should work, bro. That's like forcing me to buy a fucking iPhone. I don't like iPhones. Why are you making me buy a fucking iPhone? Because it's the law. That's not fucking capitalism, motherfucker. That's cronyism from rich motherfuckers to other rich motherfuckers. The only socialisation that's gone on since fucking the 1960s/70s is rich people got rich and took all your tax. And then they tell you the government's a bad idea. Bitch, the government is you. All these right-wing crazy fuckers tell you big government. Motherfucker, what they say is they don't want you to fucking be as fucking, I don't know, as badass as these rich motherfuckers. If they had their way, bro, you'd be up a chimney. Fucking true, right? Because I remember all these Tories voted against the minimum wage. All of them. Fucking every single one of them when Tony Blair was in power. We don't want the minimum wage. The sky's gonna fall down. Bitch, you take that shit for granted. Who the fuck gave you the weekend? It wasn't the rich people who said, oh, we feel nice about it. Let's give you the weekend. Bitch, you had to fight for a weekend. It was unions, and now they want to say, oh, Labour's in the pocket of the unions. Fucking too right. You fucking cunts. Fuck. Honestly, people are brainwashed. It's so unbelievable. I mean, we wonder why we got no houses. You fucking sold them, that's fucking why. Now you can't build any, because you got not in my backyard. Fuck off. You had to listen to all these clowns on YouTube who are fucking Daily Telegraph reading fucking retards or whatever. Even Politics Joe, that shit's gone to shit. Not that it was ever great in the first place, because it's by like 4 yuppies who are fucking Lib Dem fucking supporters. Even now they're turning on Labour because it's good for clicks. It's bizarre. They literally interviewed the fucking head editor of the Daily Telegraph, and the first thing that came out of that yuppie's mouth was, I agree, Keir Starmer seems a bit authoritarian because he's taking away pension credits from rich pensioners. It was Labour who introduced the fucking stupid fucking wheelchair fuel allowance in 1997. You fucking clowns. Think pensioners got any money before that? No. Who was in charge before the Labour Party in 1997? The Tories. I mean, get the fuck out of here. Oh, the Tories are fucking innocent of all the shit that's going on in Labour's portfolio. Bitch, if you didn't drive our country under the fucking bus, we wouldn't be having any of these conversations. Migration, Tories, NHS, Tories. The only thing that's not on the fucking news is strikes. And then the Tories are complaining that we paid people who ain't been paid in 15 fucking years. What? It's like I live in a different reality than these fucking scummy cunts. It's amazing. Literally. Oh, well, you don't want to give people money. What? They haven't been paid for 15 years. We had austerity for 10. Remember pie tax with George Osborne? You fucking kidding me? Fucking clowns. They spent more money fucking sending one person to Rwanda than any fucking migrants. Oh my god. And it's not even the poor bastards on the boats. They come on planes. I've been saying this for ages. The fella who said, oh yeah, they come on planes, what did they do to him? Sack them. Fuck the Tories and fuck all you fucking idiots who think the Tories somehow are like even half close to as bad as fucking Labour. They're terrible. 15 years we have to put it on them bastards. 14, 15. You know why? Because they're fucking clowns. And they didn't even win the first election. They lost. And they have to make a coalition government. And who put them in power first time it comes around? The fucking stupid Lib Dems. Nick fucking Clegg, that fucking clown. And where does he work now? Yeah, works for Facebook. Fucking bitch.
Quick removal of all cladding right across these aisles so that we don't see a repeat of this horrible tragedy.
Prime Minister.
Yes, and it's a really important point. It doesn't matter where you live, whatever the government that you're living under, the right to safe and secure housing is important whoever you are, wherever you are. The Deputy Prime Minister has already met the First Minister and we will take every opportunity to work jointly on this as we go forward.
Mr. Speaker, how many times must we come here and hear another example of how the state that should be on the side of ordinary people actually becomes the enemy of working class people? Hillsborough, Horizon post office scandal, the contaminated blood, Windrush, and the treatment of former armed forces personnel in the LGBT community. And in each of these, the state has become the enemy of the people, but also delayed paying compensation to them. So can this be a watershed where we end the...
Who's in charge for every single one of them tragedies? Can you just ask that question to yourself? Do you remember who was in charge when that shit happened? I'll tell you who's in charge when fucking my shit happened, i.e. Hillsborough, the fucking Tories. There you go. These fucking cunts again at it. They've ruined our country to, like, every time they get elected, they fuck it up royally. And then Labour get blamed for fixing their shit. Like, for real. Every single fucking time. We vote these fucking stupid xenophobic fucktards in who never fucking had a job, a real fucking job in their fucking life. And then they want to tell you we're all in together. Go fuck yourself. And then they're crying about the pensioners who are fucking rich. And Labour's supposed to be having a wobble. Get the fuck out of here, man. Shut up. It's annoying. It's annoying to listen to our right-wing press lose their shit. Just like Republicans in the United States. I mean, shit, I watch a lot of fucking American shit. And it's just the same. Americans are batshit crazy. I wouldn't even call them Republicans anymore. The cult members of Donald fucking Trump. Equally batshit crazy. They want small government. They don't even know what a fucking government is. They call paying tax socialism. How fucking stupid is that? Well, if you don't give us money, the world's going to fall down. What do you mean? You want rich people to be more fucking richer? Fuck off. Like, fuck the fuck off. You put in law that I have to pay a water company £56 a month or some stupid shit. 56% more. Whatever the fuck it is, right? More money than a private corporation? How is that fucking possible? Oh, because the government can't run shit, bro. I would rather the government be shit at its fucking job knowing that it's going back to someone who fucking needs it, i.e. me. When you pay the government money, they get 100% of your money. When you give it to a private corporation, how much tax do you think a corporation pays in regards to how much goes back into the coffers? Fucking 75%? No. About 25% goes back to the fucking government because they always want business, don't they? You know, this business has always got lower fucking rates than the fucking goddamn fucking people who built the fucking country, i.e. the working class. Like, we're some marginalised bunch of fuckwits. We run the fucking country. We are the government, ladies and gentlemen. That's why we got rid of kings and queens, remember? I'm just saying, now you think a corporation's a king and queen, like, oh, well, let's be scared. All the rich people are going to go away. Nobody's going to pay any tax. Bitch, fucking cleaners pay a higher rate of tax than fucking Amazon do. Are you fucking shitting me? Like, we're all going to go broke because Amazon pays tax? Fuck off. Fuck the fuck off. Brainwashed, deadbeat, uneducated fucking clowns have been brainwashed since the 70s. Neoliberalism. Look the fucking word up already. You fucking morons. Honestly. Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, fucking teammates in convincing people that business is good for fucking you when it's not. Business is good for shareholders, motherfucker. That's what you need to fucking know. It was the fucking Americans who invited China to the World Trade Organization under fucking Nixon. And now they're going to tell you China's the enemy. If China was the enemy, why'd you import all this shit? Tell me why. Because it's good for business. Get the fuck out of here. They must think everyone's fucking dumb as fucking they are.
this process where the state becomes the enemy of working class people, and that we treat them with the dignity that they deserve, and that they're...
You can't treat the working class with dignity because the rich people have got the ear of all the politicians, motherfucker. That's the problem. Just like in the USA, they call them lobbyists, motherfucker. It's just basic corruption. I'm a bribe you is what I'm going to fucking do. I'm going to give you a fucking check and you write a fucking law and give me less tax. I don't want to pay tax. Why? Because I'm a selfish motherfucking cunt. That's the entire point of these fucking people. I earned my billions. Bitch, you didn't earn no fucking interest on your billions. That shit comes from free, from a bank. And fuck knows how they managed to give you that, considering they can't print the fucking shit, can they? Get the point? You tell me any bank other than a central bank that can print you fucking money from thin air. Nobody. So how does that scam work then? Oh, I forgot. They just make it up. Fucking pricks.
Compensation is paid rapidly and not delayed as it has been in all those other cases. And in the case of those freeholders who are still holding out and not paying for the remedial work to their properties, it's about time they paid fines for delaying that work being carried out.
Yeah. Prime Minister.
This is a really important point because I don't know how many examples of injustice where people have not been listened to, disregarded. There's been an injustice, and different prime ministers over the years have stood at this dispatch box and quite genuinely made commitments on the back of reports. I don't doubt that for a minute. I think every prime minister who stood here in relation to any of those injustices meant every word that he or she said in response, and yet it goes on. So there is something more fundamental that we have to make time to consider, because I do not want to be back at this dispatch box or any future.
Bro, there's nothing to consider. Stop sucking the rich people's dicks. That's all you need to stop doing, motherfucker. Stop sucking rich dick. We fucking print the money. You can't pay tax if there's no money. It's that simple. You issue it, then you collect it from tax. That's how inflation works, you fucking clowns. So do us a favour. Tax the rich. Because they've got all the money. You can't tax poor people. They've got no fucking money. Like the worst fucking mathematics class I've ever been to in my life is modern day politics. Because everyone's confused on the fuck how money works, apparently. Fucking idiots. Do me a favour, look it up in the dictionary. Fucking money. Like, have a nice fucking day. These people are fucking idiots. Tax the rich. Even Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the fucking world, pays less tax, and literally said it on CBS. Like, literally said, I pay less tax than my cleaner. In what world are we living where Warren Buffett is paying less tax than his fucking cleaner? That's wrong. And people, well, rich people pay the higher share. No, they don't. That, again, is just bullshit lies. The rich people don't pay all the taxes. The vast majority of the plebs who go to shop pay taxes, mate. Not rich people. How do you think they've got so much money? Do you think they get paid 90% tax on all that money? No, they fucking don't. They pay less tax than you. And you got no money. That's called proportion. In proportion of tax, we pay a higher proportion of tax than any rich fucker. It's a fact. But they just want to convince you that rich people pay all their money. Don't be fucking stupid. It's a fucking lie and has been for a long ass time. Rich people like being rich. They don't want to take their money away because it's a status issue. Oh, I'm a millionaire. Well, I'm a billionaire, bitch. Fuck you, pay your tax. Fucker. The most time in America, this is not a joke, you can go look this up. The most successful time in America, right, was when the fucking Americans got charged 90% tax. All the rich got taxed 90%. That was the most fucking, what was it, roaring 20s or some shit? Everyone had to pay tax. Well, the rich did. More tax. And that was the most successful time economically in the United States, when all the rich fuckers paid their fair share as a proportion of your income. That's what normal people do. Pay a proportion of their income. Rich people don't pay that shit. Are you mad? Are you mad? The reason why we got so many billionaires running around planet fucking Earth It's because these fucking ass clown fucking politicians suck their fucking dicks. Fucking dick suckers.
The Prime Minister at this dispatch box having a version.
I mean, I'm not like homophobic, but I'm just saying, fucking cockwombles. There you go, better word. Cockwombles. They're just all cockwombles, all ass grifters, fucking dicks, whatever the fuck you want to call it. That's them. And they've been doing this since the 70s. Remember globalisation, ladies and gentlemen? Remember that party trick we played on the poor? Oh, globalisation, it's good for you. Yeah, shut the fuck up. I'm sick of these fucking clowns reinventing the fucking wheel. There's two kinds of people that live on planet Earth, rich and poor. Best you fucking know it, you fucking idiots.
Of the same discussion, which is
otherwise.
injustice,
Fucking
disregard, not
that.
listened to, not taken seriously after the event, too long, too late for people who desperately need justice. And that's what I mean by turning a corner.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The inquiry report is damning and the testimony that we heard is utterly devastating. And first and foremost, all of our thoughts are with the victims, the survivors, the bereaved and everybody affected. In the last Parliament, many of us fought tooth and nail on a cross-party basis to improve the fire safety bill and the building safety bill in order that those people, social tenants and leaseholders who are still living in buildings covered in cladding with other fire safety defects could get that remediation work as quickly as possible. It is now clear that in some cases, the waterfall system that has been set up by which we identify who is responsible is simply not working and is taking far too long. One idea that was on the table in the last Parliament was that in some cases, the government could put the money up to pay for the remediation, to take away the risk, and then use the power of the state and its lawyers to go after those responsible with penalties so that the taxpayer would not lose out. Could I please ask the Prime Minister, who now says it is a moment of change, who has committed to speed things up, whether he will review this idea and see whether it could be used in some limited cases where there has still been no action?
Great question.
Prime Minister.
This is a really important point, and for my own constituency, I know of examples where what happened was a contract, was a subcontract, a subcontract, a subcontract. I think in one case in my constituency, it went through 7 subcontractors before the person who was actually responsible was found, and everybody simply...
That's the scam. That's the scam. Why you a subcontractor so you're not liable? It's just like when you have a shell company. If you're a fraudster, what you do, you set up a company in some fucking stupid far-flung parts of the fucking world. Not in your name, clearly. I mean, honestly, you can do this in the UK. I'm not promoting fraud, but you could do it in Jersey. Right? PPE scam anybody? Yeah, you know who you are. Right? Anybody. Point is, it's a scam. And it's for greed. Like, if we just accept the fact that we live in a world which is basically monopoly, which is corporations and capitalism. Give you a good example. Misconception of history, one of the biggest misconceptions of history. England was in the slave trade. No, it's fucking corporations were though. You can go look this shit up anywhere you want. The corporations who paid the king were the fucking slave traders. Not the country. The fuckers who run the companies. Go and look up the names of the companies if you want. We all know what they fucking are. East Indian fucking company, blah blah blah. There's one in fucking the Netherlands too. Or Holland, I should say. But you get the fucking point. Corporations, motherfucker. And the countries let them get away with it because they divvy up the taxes. And this is the point. These fucking ass clown politicians are just beholden to them. They're terrified of rich newspapers, rich motherfucking billionaires. They're so terrified when actually they should be scared of the fucking plebs. They should be scared of the plebs. And I think there's one billionaire, I forgot his name, Mark something. I think his name's Mark. But anyway, he's a billionaire. It's like some tech bro from the United States. He's not tech bro, he'd probably hate me if I said that. Anyway, he's from the United States. And what he's doing is, which I found hilarious, he's trolling all the giant pharmacy companies in the United States. He's basically buying up all the generic drugs and giving them to people just slightly over cost. So you can go and buy drugs that would cost you normally $1,000 in the United States, and he literally sells them to you for like $20. No jokes. And if you don't believe me, he was on The Daily Show, probably like a week ago, I think I watched it. Literally, that guy's trolling them all, because he's a billionaire himself. He owns like some NFL football team or some shit, but he's buying all the patents, generic ones, where the companies are ripping people off in the United States, and he's like trolling the fuck out of them. He doesn't need the money, so he's just basically giving away the drugs. I mean, he's making a little bit of profit, you know, pay people and shit, but he's not going like, no, I want $1,000. He's saying, no, just give me like 20. It only cost me like $16. Just give me $4. I'm fine. You see the point? And he's a fucking billionaire. Some people are just fucking arsenic, crazy, greed, obsessed fucking motherfuckers. If everybody decided, I'm not gonna go to work today, you'd be no rich people. Rich people rely on your fucking stupidity and your fucking greed, and we should tax them back into reality, because there's far too many of them. They're even worse than the aristocracy of like fucking medieval times. These fuckers think they're beyond the fucking law, aka Donald fucking Trump. Anybody
took a cut of the contract and passed it on. That is a real problem. We do have to get to the bottom of that. We can't allow that to happen. Of course, we'll consider any proposals that are put forward in response to this report, but this is a very real problem of contracts simply being subcontracted over and over again, and trying to find accountability, and that is very, very difficult.
Don Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Prime Minister for this statement today. I recently visited the Grenfell site with Lord Bertang, who's in the chamber today. Excuse me, Speaker. And everybody there at Grenfell wants they want people to be held responsible. Those in boots, but also those in suits. There's a lot of money that's also gone missing, and some have called for the use of joint enterprise in ensuring that everybody is held responsible. And some survivors have written a poetry book, and there's one poem called So What Simon by Mary Gardner, and she said, just the ending, this is not about mercy or grace or kindness, it's about justice and honesty and believing we are all born equal, and that is how we die. No amount of wealth can make us differ so much that where we live becomes a rabbit hutch. Change your minds, you people with power, or give it over and let us flower. Does the Prime Minister agree that justice delayed is justice denied?
Prime Minister.
Yes, I do, and I particularly agree that justice isn't a question of grace or kindness. It is an entitlement, and it's an entitlement to every single citizen in this country, and that needs to be honoured as we go forward from here. And can I just take the opportunity to thank all those working on the memorial, which I know is very, very important. It's at an important stage of the work in relation to the memorial, but I know it's very, very important to the community.
Robert General.
I thank the Prime Minister for his statement today. The Grenfell fire was an unimaginable tragedy, but as he rightly said, it was also a comprehensive failure by the British state. And in many respects, that comprehensive failure persists to today. I'm grateful for the words that he said about giving all resource and support to the police and to the CPS, because clearly the victims, the survivors, the community of North Kensington want the insights and the answers that they've had partly today, but they also want justice, and that needs to be delivered as soon as possible. Equally, I fully support the effort that he's going to take forwards to see if further regulatory changes are required. They need to be done in a proportionate and effective way, and there are lessons to be learnt from changes that we've made in the recent past. But when doing those, can I urge him to look in particular at the testing facility, the BRE, the status of that and the way it operates, which I think has failed significantly and is laid out in the report. And finally, can I concur with him on the broader point that he made today, which is that when one speaks to the victims and their families, one's left with a very strong sense that many people in social housing in our country feel like they are second-class citizens, that they are being treated with disrespect, and that must end. And would he take forward the work that began with the Social Housing White Paper to ensure that that never happens again in the future?
Prime Minister.
Yeah, I thank him for that question. Yes, all support will be given to the police and the CPS, and I absolutely agree this must be done as swiftly as possible. And I think the police have made a statement in relation to that earlier today. I'll look at the particular point he raises in relation to testing, but I think the whole House needs to come together to recognise that in social housing, there has been a profound disrespect for a very long time across a number of communities, and we have to turn a corner on that.
Margaret Millay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask if the Prime Minister will join me following the wildfires of 2022 in Dagenham and Rainham, the ongoing crisis at Launders Lane in Rainham, and now the devastating fire at the Spectrum building, also in my constituency, in commending the outstanding work of our emergency services. And will he comment on the government's plans to improve fire resilience and safety in residential buildings, and to hold those responsible to account when tragedies like this happen?
Prime Minister.
Yes, it's very important that they're held to account, and I thank her for raising the particular issues in relation to Dagenham, and join with her in commending the emergency services who have to respond to these awful incidents, and having spoken to some of the first responders, you get a real sense of the impact it has on them as well. And I know the Deputy Prime Minister has visited the Dagenham scene in the last few days.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and the way he delivered it, and Sir Martin for his comprehensive report. Those needless deaths that happened at Grenfell will never go away and never be forgotten. Those of us that have been on the silent walks for Grenfell every year since it happened and visited many times fully understand the strength of feeling and the anger, the deep anger in the community at this needless loss of life, brought about by a contract culture, deregulation, privatisation, ignorance and frankly contempt for working class communities by many who should have done much more to protect and defend those people.
If people don't like Jezza, to be fair, wasn't a great leader, but fuck me. Like, thank you. Like, he's just summed up my fucking entire rant. Way better than my rant, though my rant was probably spectacular to some people. He just did it normal, right? It is. It's like, you can't make it up, really, how full of shit people are who are supposedly in power. Tories. Like, at the time of all of these mad disasters, it's always been Tories. I mean, fuck me. But anyway, fact is, it's a greed culture. It just is. It's greed. Like, most of the shit in today's mad society is based on money. Like, you got kids saying, I want to be a YouTuber and shit like that. You don't want to be astronauts or, God forbid, a politician or anything useful in life. No, I want to be a YouTuber because I like money and there's lots of fame. It's like, what the fuck has happened to society? It's fell off a fucking cliff. And I blame these arse clowns who were basically neoliberals for pushing this batshit crazy agenda. Just like instant celebrityism. Basically, that's all I can fucking say. Like, that's it. It's just, YouTube is just all about clickbait, stupid shit, even thumbnails. And they, you know what the mad thing is, like, if you watch YouTubers, they admit it. It's clickbait. They know exactly what they're doing. They put certain words together just so you click on it. Amazing. Capital letters and all this stupid shit. Just so you get your fucking click on. And people are like, oh, that sounds interesting, I'll click on it. Boring as fuck. Not even the same shit that they put in the fucking title. It's fucking terrible. Society has gone down the fucking swanny. And I blame the internet. I do. I blame the internet for most of the stupid shit. Because people think the internet is somehow like, I'm not going to say real life, but they literally think that, like, the vast majority of people think like them because internet. It's like, bro, have you seen how many people live on planet Earth? The vast majority aren't obsessive fucking ass clowns like you. They just ain't. But if you watch the internet, if you go on the internet, you'd think otherwise, right? Because they think, oh, everyone's got the internet. Bro, I can tell you facts and stats, and you'll be like, that can't be true. Germany throws away more food in one day than's in the UN budget. You wouldn't believe that in the slightest, but it's true. Like, these tell you all kinds of stupid shit, and they could fix them if they just tax the people who actually have the money. Or do something like efficient instead of being ass clowns and pandering. Like the whole immigration thing that they just talked about before, about the small boats. Yeah, people dying is not nice. But that's not the immigration problem in the United Kingdom, is it? No. It's planes and legal migration. It's got fuck all to do with small boats. If the amount of people who came over on small boats to fill up Britain the way it's filled up, there would be cruise liners down the fucking English Channel. Do you see cruise liners down the English Channel? No, you don't. This is the point. These news outlets convince you of a reality that doesn't even fucking exist. Like, rich people are going to run off if we tax them. Run exactly where to? Where they're going to run to? China? Good luck. They're going to run to Russia? Good luck. Where they're going to run to? Every other country's fucking broke in terms of not the West. So where's all your money coming from, Mr. Rich Guy? You see the point? They convince you of a reality that don't exist. Tax the fuck out of the rich. They ain't going anywhere. They like being free to make lots of money. Do you think Putin's going to put up with that shit? No. You gotta take your money. We've already seen him take all the fucking rich people's money off them. They don't like his ass. And they can't get rid of him either. Which is terrible. Same with the fucking Chinese. They're communists, right? My ass. They like money as much as fucking everybody. They're not stupid. They know what a fucking greenback is, per se. Get what I'm saying? So for all these ass clowns out there telling you can't tax the rich, shut the fuck up. Shut up. And stop getting convinced. Like we don't live in a system which is there to benefit the rich. Like I said, America has this weird thing, it's called lobbyists. No, mate, that's legalised corruption. That's exactly what that is. Ask Bernie Sanders, he's been fighting against it for fucking years. Get money out of politics. It's just a fact. You know? I mean, it's not a nice fact, but it's still a fact. Same with the newspapers. Most of our newspapers, the people who own them don't even live in the United Kingdom. And they're stupidly fucking rich. And a right wing. So the sky's gonna fall down if you get paid more than a $5 or some shit. Honestly. That's what they all voted for. Oh, we're not voting against fucking the minimum wage. It will destroy businesses. And businesses are wealth creators. Bro, you ain't got a business if no one's got a job. Because if we decide we ain't going to work for £2 an hour, who the fuck are you going to employ? You see the point? And the migration thing is mad because, like some people said, it lowers the wages of normal people because normal people ain't working for that shit. So you employ someone illegally, backhander, job done. And it's not like you go to a restaurant and ask, are you getting paid the fucking minimum wage? I doubt they're going to fucking tell you the truth now, are they? No. So we got the black market thing going on. All the dodgy shit. Oh, and then when you get caught, what you claim asylum? Oh, it wasn't me, Gaff. I was forced to work or whatever. It's all bullshit, really. I mean, to be fair, I don't blame other people wanting to make their lives better. I just don't, right? But at the same time is, don't pretend that I'm fucking stupid. And you're like some rocket scientist or some shit. Like, I can't count to 10. Because that's what these politicians do. They rely on people with slogans, sound bites. The news does it every time. It's breaking news. Breaking news. Just stop. Stop. Stop, stop, stop. We're supposed to teach our kids how to critically think and then we hand them TikTok. Which has got the attention span of a fucking goldfish. How the fuck are our kids supposed to be smart? When they literally watch videos for 12 seconds of just dumb shit. That's not very fucking intelligent now, is it? No. Well, these companies, they love it because they make money from adverts. Like, I remember a time when people used to be like, how the fuck did I watch one video and now I've got like 1 billion of them and like stupid emails and shit in me inbox? Because they're tracking your ass with cookies and doing all this smart shit. And it's all for money. People get onto it. A cookie should be there. It should be there on your computer just for one thing. Normally a username and password. And to save some information. Like links. Right? But they use this nefariously. Tracking all your shit. Oh, you seen a Nike advert and you stayed on this fucking webpage for like 5 seconds. Oh, we'll spam them with Nike for the rest of his fucking life. Or whatever. Fucking horrible cunts. It's got to do with the whole social aspect of just mad shit. People are angry all the time on the internet as well. Half of them don't even know how to turn a computer on, which is fucking amazing. They use Google as a form of fucking education tool instead of like reading books or whatever. Because they're lazy. Or the internet said yeah, so therefore it must be correct. Bro, we broke half the fucking world about 2 months ago when some dumbass updated a fucking web page thing. It wasn't even a web page, operating system on Windows and nearly crashed the economy and the planet because most people use fucking Windows. Fucking one stupid company who does the irony, they do fucking security. And then he broke the entire fucking economy with an update that was broken, and they updated it and crashed everyone's fucking Windows and everyone got blue screen and shit. It's hilarious. We're too reliant on computers, and now they want to fucking say AI is good for you. On what planet do they think we live on? Well, I know what planet we live on, but what planet do they think they live on, I should say? AI is good for you. Bro, AI is there to replace a human being. Proper. Robots ain't that good, but they got rid of a lot of jobs with robots. No offense. Because of automation. What do you think they're going to do next with AI? A thing that can think like you? What? You're going to replace humans at that point? I'm just saying, if you've got a job on a computer, kiss your ass goodbye then, innit? Because if you can do it on a computer can do it better than you. It's literally a computer. It knows how to do it better than you. When people say, I broke my computer, my computer's broke. No, you touched the button. So I broke. So AI, they always try and convince you, oh, it's good for you. Yeah, it's great. I mean, it is in some ways. It's good at solving problems, like medical problems and shit like that. It would take you normally fuck tons longer to do it, right? Or whatever. But not when it comes to jobs. You should ban that shit straight away. I've said this for ages as someone who works in like the gaming industry and does graphics and shit. We won't need actors for much longer. We'll just make them. We'll just make a fucking AI, fucking stupid character. Don't need voiceovers because we can fucking do that too. We can fake being human already. That's why people are going on strike. Because they're like, well, what do you need me for then? It's like, we don't. We literally don't. I remember the good old days when I used to make web pages in Notepad. Am I needed anymore? Is my technical ability on web pages needed? No, it's fucking not. Because some dumbass wrote a code that now you can make web pages as easy as picking your fucking nose. Like, for real. So, your job being whatever the fuck it is on a computer, the AI is coming for you sooner or later. I know that for a fact. And people think, nah, that's not going to happen. Bro, phones in your pocket are more powerful than the fucking spaceships we put in space. Like, there's more power in an iWatch than the entire fucking space shuttle. Like, that's not like a joke. That's actually true. Like, imagine that. How long was it ago? Like 10 years ago? Fuck me. Nothing really existed 10 years ago. It all does now, though, innit? You know what I'm saying? And people remember MySpace? Fucking garbage. And all that shit. .com bubble. Nah, it's a lot worse than that now. And they still won't tax the rich. Oh, we can't tax the rich. But bro, if I said to you, count to 1 billion yesterday, you would die before you got to 1 billion. You can't even count to 1 billion in a human lifetime. That's how long that number is. And we can't we just take 1 zero off your billion? Make you nearly a billionaire? No. I need to be rich. Suck my fucking balls. You stupid cunts. Oh, well, the country sucks. Yeah. All the rich people got all the fucking money. That's why it sucks. I'm not even talking about like free shit. I'm just about tax. Like, you watch videos sometimes and go like, oh, it's free healthcare. It's not really free. It's just taxed. But the thing is, the taxation that these arsenic politicians collect ain't enough. It just ain't enough from your average Joe or Joelette or whatever. It just ain't enough money. They issue it and the fucking rich hoover it all up and put it in a bank, which you can't tax. Like, that's stupid. They don't tax wealth when that's where all the money is. If you keep going around trying to tax income, be here all fucking day. We need a wealth tax, a proper one. They did it in the United States a long time ago. And what was the result? I don't know, the interstate highway. I'm just saying. Wasn't a waste of money if you think about it that way now, was it? No. And the reason for that is because the rich people were going to get literally stolen. Their money was going to be taken anyway. And not by politicians. The poor were coming after them. So the very smart politician, the one who they elected 3 times, by the way. 3 times. And a lot of people go, what? Oh, yeah, 3 times he was elected. They changed the fucking law after that. He was a Democrat. Guess his name. Anyway, point being is, he's like, no. I've got a better idea. How about you pay tax? And the rich are like, what? pay, hang on, say that word again. Yeah, pay some tax. And guess what happened? The poor people decided not to take their pitchforks and fucking take their money anyway. Because that's what's going to happen. If this keeps going on, this scenario, the poor will have no choice but to take your fucking money. You can hide wherever you want, bro. But when the rich people think they're untouchable, that's when it hits the fan. French Revolution, anybody? I'm just saying. It's right there in the history book. When the rich get too rich and out of line, the poor people decide, nah, we're just going to take your shit this time. Do you think people robbing shops right now ain't a fucking sign of things to come? Why are they robbing shops? Because they've got no shit and everything's shiny and they want some of that shiny shit. You've told them all your life, shiny shit's good. Well, now they're all on crack. They want that shiny shit. They don't give a fuck about the law because they watch too many YouTube videos. They want the shiny shit and it's only going to get worse. People are like, you're mad. I ain't mad, bro. I predict the UK election 7 months before anybody else. I ain't mad. I pay attention. And these motherfuckers ass kiss the rich too much. Way too much. Even rich people know they get their ass licked by these fucking pointless politicians. Tax the rich, end of story. And the world will get better. Quicker.
So I hope the Prime Minister's words will be carried through. Criminal action will follow against those that deliberately neglected those that were in a position of more appalling and extreme danger. Will he also assure the House that the removal of dangerous cladding that has happened on most local authority-owned buildings all over the country will actually now take place also in the leasehold private sector buildings that many of our constituents live in, where they are faced with enormous insurance costs because of the existence of dangerous cladding, and this has gone on now for several years, and as the companies that are responsible for this dangerous cladding refuse to pay up for it, the problem is then forced onto the people who are themselves victims of being put in this position of danger. There are so many lessons to be learned from Grenfell, and I hope that the words the Prime Minister just used about the contract culture in local government, the endless subcontracting, so that those responsible for dangerous conditions evade all responsibility, will end, and we'll end the idea of a local government internal market and instead have the principle of local government delivery of service as the primary responsibility to ensure all citizens live in safety, and that council housing becomes a thing that grows very rapidly in the next few years, and we get more good quality, secure council housing built for the good of the people that are living in desperate housing need, often currently in the private rented sector.
Thank you.
I've got a video somewhere, I don't know where it is, but I'm going to try and find it. Because I got someone's number on this one. I don't know where it is, but I've got it somewhere. Hopefully I can find it in time without you guys going, what are you doing? It's a video that I uploaded on this channel actually, but in case you don't want to fucking be asked to watch it, I'll go and find it, I should say. Where is it? I don't even know what the fuck it is, to be fair. Anyway, it's Angela Rayner literally talking about... It is, I found it because I'm a fucking genius. You ready? Listen to this. This is literally on my channel. I fucked it up. I think I uploaded it twice by mistake.
If there's... You mentioned Barbara Castle earlier.
Yeah, shut up. Now listen to this. This is Angela Rayner, right there. Deputy leader of the fucking couldn't Labour Party. This is her. Press play then. Fucking muppet.
And that is, if there's... You mentioned Barbara Castle earlier. If there's one thing that you could be remembered for as a government minister, what would it be?
Council houses. I'm going to build the next wave of social and council houses. Nice ones, green ones you want to live in.
Yeah. Well, fucking hold you to that. Council houses, social houses, green ones, fucking nice ones you want to fucking live in. Get that shit straight. Some of us pay attention. Just saying. Motherfucker. So I'm fucking holding her to that one. Because I've got it recorded. So she better fucking add.
The point about leaseholders is a really important point that we are taking action in relation to, whether it's insurance or other issues that the House is well aware of in relation to leaseholders. It's important that is included in the work that we take forward. I'm absolutely committed to the quality of council and social housing as we go forward and build those 1.5 million homes. And just on this point about those that lost their lives, it is important, I know the whole House knows this, it isn't just a number. Each and every single one is a human being to be respected and cherished and remembered for who they were, not just a number.
Benkel.
On the council estates in Chelsea, which I have the honour of representing, Grenfell and the incompetence and indifference shown both before and after the tragedy by the local council and by the TMO are still very much discussed. I think one of the striking things that the report brings out is the extraordinary response by the local community where the official response failed. And it was very heartening to hear the Prime Minister talking about a rebalancing of power. And this is absolutely essential. One of the particular things I hope we will be doing is ensure that councils in future gather proper information on disabled people living in social housing, 15 of whom, we must remember, died in the Grenfell fire, in order to ensure that they can be evacuated safely in such a situation. And so, as well as taking action against companies, which I fully support, will the Prime Minister commit to working closely with local authorities to implement the report, so to protect our fellow citizens, whether they live in social housing or indeed anywhere else, from this sort of thing happening again?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for that question. I have to say, reading the part of the report that dealt with the indifference and disrespect after the tragedy was really hard. You would have thought, at the very least, after a tragedy like this, with the failures that went before, that in the aftermath they would be treated with the utmost respect, and yet the same disregard carried on afterwards, the lack of basic respect and dignity, and that is part of what this report is all about. In relation to disabled people, it is really important that there are plans in place, and we've taken that forward in relation to people with disabilities who are housed in circumstances where they clearly need a plan for their own evacuation. And yes, of course, we'll work with local authorities on this and all relevant authorities.
Kit Maltos.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the things I learned in my interactions with the Grenfell bereaved and survivors and Grenfell United.
But I got him just before he spoke. But one thing that's going to be important, which I think is going to happen, which is they're going to have to change the law of manslaughter with corporations, because they haven't changed that in such a long fucking time. I don't think, unless they change the law, nobody's going to jail for corporate manslaughter. Like, nobody. I mean, we can't even throw people in jail for putting shit in the river. Do you think these fuckers are going to go to jail for killing 73 people? Good luck. Good fucking luck. So, they're going to have to change the law. I can see that happening. Because I don't see them be getting done for manslaughter in the corporation law. This is not a civil case where, like, you know, oh, you ran someone over, it's your fault, go to jail or whatever. This is accountability for corporations to be held accountable, technically, as a civil case. So, I mean, what's the best they're going to do? Give them a fucking fine. I don't think that's going to go down fucking well. So, I think they're going to need to change the law. That's a fact.
During my time as housing minister was that their pain was compounded by their frustration at the pace of change, even some years after the fire. And it was a frustration I shared as we tried to make progress on building safety issues. However, one of the things that really did sharpen our minds and make the government machine jump to it was the prospect of external scrutiny. So I wonder, I heard the Prime Minister say that he wants to return to the House annually to update on progress. I'm afraid I don't think that's going to give the government machine, with which I know he will do his best, the kind of impetus that's required. So would he either recommend to whoever is elected as the chair of the select committee that they establish a specific subcommittee to look at progress on the recommendations of this report, or if not, support a cross-party committee of the House being established to drive through these changes and monitor government progress? Because while an annual debate will, I know, be welcome, as I say, I just don't think it's going to give the sense of urgency that's required so that we can address these issues swiftly.
Prime Minister.
This question of external scrutiny is really important, and we will, of course, report annually. There is a recommendation, as he probably knows, in the report about scrutiny, which we want to look at carefully and discuss with the community, because they have strong views on this. Obviously, we'll take into account views of members across the House in relation to this, including whether it should be something the Select Committee should look at. But I'm not sure that it's my role to tell the Select Committee what to look at. But I do agree that this question of external scrutiny and accountability is really important, and we have to make sure the most robust scrutiny is in place.
Beauregard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I just say to my right honourable friend that I don't think I've ever heard him speak more powerfully, more personally and more movingly than he did in this statement. And I know that the more than 20,000 residents in my constituency who are still living in high-rise blocks with the nightmare of fire risk constantly upon them will welcome what he has said about the way in which the government will take a very consistent and measured view of the recommendations and move to implement them systematically. They'll also welcome what he said about prosecution of those who were responsible for the, and I quote Sir Martin, systematic dishonesty and deliberate and sustained strategies to manipulate the testing process. Yep. I want, though, to turn to remediation, because here I want to reinforce what the Honourable Lady from the Liberal Democrats said. Many of the owners of these blocks have sold on to further owners and further owners beyond that. And the Prime Minister referred to the subcontracting, but there's also been the on-selling. Some of those owners are now living in tax havens, British Virgin Islands and others, and they are simply not complying, they're not even applying for the Building Safety Fund to get this remediation work done. So will he consider very carefully what powers the government can take in order to take control of these buildings, get the work done, and then recover the costs, if necessary, by acquiring and selling the buildings themselves?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for raising that issue, which is a very real issue. And I think one of the things that we need to do is to look at what further powers may be necessary. I don't think that we can suggest for a minute that the existing legislation, guidance and policy is already there and is sufficient. We need more powers, and we will be looking at that and bring proposals back to the House. And of course there will be a general debate, because I know that many members will want to discuss particular issues in their constituency of those that are fearful of the conditions in which they're living.
Sean Barr.
Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Prime Minister for his very serious and compassionate statement today. The events of June 2017 do feel like yesterday, and I can't imagine how the people more directly affected must be feeling right now. We must act in every way we can, together as much as possible. However, I note that the inquiry report does not make new proposals for transparency and accountability for social housing tenants and leaseholders, particularly around access to fire risk assessments and related information, which is still very, very hard for residents to access. I saw it myself in London. I'm seeing it still in Brighton. And I note that the previous government did not act on calls for housing associations to be subject to freedom of information, and that's despite calls that included from the Information Commissioner themselves as long ago as August 2017. So will the Prime Minister also act now to fix these kinds of gaps in resident empowerment and access to information, which will be very simple and are not covered by the report today?
Prime Minister.
We'll obviously look at all the recommendations that are there from this morning and report back to the House, but we need to look at wider issues as well, and access to risk assessments is a really important issue that we are considering, and there shouldn't be gaps. One of the benefits of a debate across the House will be an opportunity for these and further points to be raised that we will then take back and consider.
Marsha Dakova.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today, my thoughts are with the victim survivors, the family and the entire Grenfell community today. We know that systemic dishonesty and the many, many injustices meant that the people of Grenfell were treated like second-class citizens. Successive governments, the local authority and industry knew about the risks but failed to act. And as Sir Martin says, the deaths that occurred were entirely avoidable. 7 years on, no one has faced criminal proceedings, and there are still thousands living in homes wrapped in unsafe cladding. I welcome what the Prime Minister said today, and I welcome the way he delivered his statement, and I will also just put on record my thanks that the government will be implementing Phase 1 recommendation to ensure that every disabled person living in a high-rise block will have a personal evacuation plan specific to their needs. Thank you for that. But I ask the Prime Minister today, when he returns to the House to update us, it's vital that those living in unsafe homes have clear deadlines as to when the flammable cladding or the unsafe cladding will be removed so that they can have a decent night's sleep.
I agree with that, and I think that's why we have to recognise the work is going too slowly, and we need to push that work on with clear timetables to ensure that it is done. And just in relation to the first part of her question, the words in the report that these deaths were entirely avoidable must be chilling for all of the family members and the community at large.
Aaron Hall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I commend the Prime Minister and indeed the Leader of the Opposition for the candour and the tone which they've adopted this afternoon. I think that it was pitch perfect, both of them. But could I just press the Prime Minister on a point which Sir Max Hill, KC, was talking about in a broadcast interview this morning, which is the urgent need for justice and for prosecutions to be brought, and a number of colleagues across the House have raised that, and the Prime Minister has already addressed it. But could I just press him on this point, to ensure that there is adequate resource within the policing arena and that there is capacity within the court system in order to bring cases, where appropriate, as speedily as possible. These businesses are inclined to dissolve themselves and disappear into the ether very, very quickly. And just to make sure that there is capacity in both the investigation and in the prosecution arena to make sure that speed is delivered. Because
listen to what he just said, bro. These companies can disappear into the ether. Nobody's going to jail. Corporate manslaughter is one of the hardest things you will ever get. For real. I don't give a fuck who you are. That's a fact. Like, seriously, that's hard to do. And if these people are going to go after these chumps who literally killed people for greed, because that's exactly what they did, they're going to have to change the law. I don't think anybody's ever gone to jail for corporate manslaughter in the United Kingdom. Ever. Unless I'm missing somebody. So, I'm thinking they're going to have to change the law. I think probably they will. Because I don't see how they're liable. I really don't. Especially under UK law anyway. I don't know what it is like in other countries. But in this one, good luck.
People have been waiting, as we all recognise, far, far too long.
Prime Minister.
Thank you. And Sir Max Hill obviously has personal experience of these sorts of cases, as in fact have I. We do need to make sure resources in place. We do need to make sure we're clear about the speed of decision making. They're not straightforward decisions, but nonetheless they should be taken as swiftly as possible. And we need to make sure that the courts are in a position to handle the cases as soon as they're ready to go to court, if there are cases to go to court.
Zara Sultana.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I join colleagues in remembering the 72 people who lost their lives in the Grenfell Tower fire tragedy, and I say to their friends and family, I will always fight to deliver justice for your loved ones. As chair of the Fire Brigades Union Parliamentary Group, I'd like to put on record my admiration for the heroic bravery of firefighters who attended that night. The FBU has long said that deregulation and corporate greed was at fault for this catastrophe, and this report vindicates that. Does the Prime Minister agree? And when will the government set up the statutory advisory body on fire policy to give firefighters and control staff to be able to set national standards and to ensure that lessons are learned? When will the timetable for that be set?
Prime Minister.
Well, let me place on record my gratitude to the firefighters on the night. Having been to Grenfell Tower, I can only begin to imagine what it must have been like to have been confronted with the situation they were confronted with and to deal with the circumstances that they had to deal with. And time and again, our first responders are asked by us, rightly, to do very challenging things. They do it, and we should thank them for doing it.
Joy Morrissey.
Thank you. May I thank the Prime Minister for taking these recommendations so seriously, and may I thank him for raising the concerns and the parity of esteem for social housing tenants. I think that is where we've seen problems so many times, so thank you for taking those recommendations forward. And will he join me in paying tribute again to the volunteer organizations, to the founding members of Grenfell United and other charities and churches who worked tirelessly in the aftermath of the Grenfell tragedy?
I thank you for that question. Just to pick up on her thing, there's a passage in the report that highlights the sort of two groups. One group is the TMO, the businesses, those that were charged with responsibility, and the other is those that lived within the tower, and they were treated differently before, during and after. And that is this question of esteem that she rightly touches on, that we must stop talking about and act on now.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My thoughts today are with the family and the loved ones of the 72 that died so tragically in the fire. And as the report identifies, those deaths were entirely avoidable due as a result of corporate greed because people put profits before people. But Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are 3,000 medium and high-rise buildings still being monitored by the government because they are clad in unsafe cladding. So will the Prime Minister state how he will support those leaseholders whose lives are on hold at the moment living in those buildings and what he's going to do to support them? And I stand in solidarity with the families in support for justice and hope they don't wait as long as the families of Hillsborough.
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for raising that. There are many premises were being monitored. That needs to continue. We need to ensure that they are safe and bear down on all the relevant authorities to make sure they are safe and give leaseholders the support that they need.
Sarah Gibson.
May I ask the Prime Minister to help and ensure that this type of disaster does not happen again by looking carefully at building control inspection? Often, this is not carried out in person, but on phone calls and by photographs, ever since deregulation. Poor inspection of works across the UK building industry currently means that other disasters like this will happen again and again unless we look carefully at how our building control is worked.
No, I agree with that, and the building control inspection that were carried out in this particular case is a shocking read in the report. It's not, it's particularly grave, but it's not the only example in relation to building control inspection, and we will look at that as we respond to this report.
Mike Amesbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I thank the Prime Minister for probably the most powerful and heartfelt statement I've ever heard him make, putting the 72 victims of Grenfell and survivors in the community at its heart with that roadmap going forward. Justice, as the Prime Minister said, must be speedy with prosecutions for those that were involved in this systemic dishonesty. But justice also means that those that have the responsibility to make buildings safe in the broader building safety crisis should do so. How is the Prime Minister going to ensure that that happens now at pace?
Well, justice does need to be speedy, and it's important that we make sure that in this case it is swift, but we bear in mind it's already taken 7 years to get to where we are today, which I think doubles the need for that speed. And all with responsibility need to take responsibility, and that's why I thought that the words of one of the members of the inquiry this morning about all of those with responsibility taking this, as it were, as a template, as a guide to the future, is very important. All those with responsibility for building safety includes me, and that's why I'll take that approach in government.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister very much for the tone, the compassion, the understanding and the seriousness in his voice and his words today. The Prime Minister, I believe, honestly, sincerely, speaks for everyone in this House in the way that the statement has been conveyed, and we thank him for that. Can I also convey to all the families, on behalf of my party, DUP, and myself, our collective sympathies. We're never far from our thoughts, even though it's a number of years. The statement has catalogued failures. There are similar buildings in Northern Ireland, so can I ask the Prime Minister, will the findings and the recommendations be conveyed to the Minister at the Northern Ireland Assembly with the urgency that is required, and ever mindful that the Northern Ireland Housing Executive and others are financially stretched? So, Prime Minister, what help can be given to deliver the much needed improvements across this great nation, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland? Thank you.
Well, thank the Honourable Member for raising the question in relation to Northern Ireland. Of course, we must work with all of the relevant authorities in Northern Ireland, and I took the opportunity very early after the formation of this government to go to Northern Ireland to make clear that that would be the way I would work on all issues. It is particularly important in relation to the safety of people in the place that they live.
Nestle Caliscan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement today, and I associate remarks made in the Chamber in thinking about the victims and the families of those who are still fighting every day for justice. I particularly welcome the Prime Minister's commitment to make sure that they see justice through the criminal justice system, but I want to further ask the Prime Minister for reassurance that through the regulatory frameworks and suggestions that are made through the over 50 recommendations of the report, that the government will work closely with local authorities to make sure that they have the support that they need and that they are able to respond to any additional regulatory burdens that might be put on them in the coming months and years.
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. It is important that we work on the regulatory framework with local authorities and with all of those charged with responsibility to make sure that, yes, there is justice in this particular case, but two, that we take the necessary action to ensure that this never happens again.
Mary Kelly-Foy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's personal commitment to changing the culture and behaviour towards council tenants that allowed this tragedy to happen. It is a national scandal. But can he ensure that residents, tenants and professional firefighters on the front line are heard and really listened to? Because we cannot trust those who caused the tragedy in the first place to put things right.
I think this is a really important issue because this is an example of a type which is where those concerned for their own safety, for the place that they live, make points, put forward issues, raise concerns, and then not listened to. And that isn't just in this case. It's a characteristic of the way that not just housing, but other aspects of life are dealt with. And we have to make sure that we listen to those that are most concerned. It is their place, it's their home. They are entitled to feel safe and secure in their home. And it's our responsibility to make sure that they are.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Prime Minister so painfully said, the Grenfell fire destroyed lives and ripped families apart. But constituents of mine are suffering too, afraid to go to sleep at night because they live in buildings that were built more recently than Grenfell with fire safety risks. The building standards that informed the recladding of Grenfell and the building of more recent blocks of flats were strong on thermal insulation to save energy costs, but very, very weak on fire safety, and their implementation has been even worse, as we now know from this report. Other jurisdictions' building regulations can cover both thermal properties and fire safety risks. So how long will it take for the UK building reg standards to catch up?
I think this is one of the issues we're going to have to look at in light of the report, but I absolutely accept that there are people today living in accommodation where they feel for their safety because of the conditions that they're living in. And having spoken to some of them myself, I got a sense of what it's like to every night worry about the safety of yourself, your family, and particularly those with children.
Nadia Whittam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for his statements and his commitments today. Madam Deputy Speaker, as the Prime Minister has said, the report makes clear that Conservative government's obsession with deregulation meant safety issues were ignored, delayed or disregarded. It says that the government was well aware of the deadly risk of cladding before the fire, but failed to act. It concludes that all 72 deaths were avoidable. This morning, Grenfell United, survivors and bereaved families urged our new government to break old habits and bring systemic change, both in terms of separating government from corporate lobbying and tackling social and racial injustices and inequalities. Will the Prime Minister undertake this work without delay?
Prime Minister.
I read very carefully what the report said about deregulation. I do think, as we go forward from here, we have to avoid the habit of simply blaming somebody else for everything and pull together and say it's our responsibility. We are a new government. Irrespective of where the failure lay, it's our responsibility now to take this forward to ensure safety. And I know that's a sentiment shared across the House, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for the approach that he's taken. I think if we do it in that way, we can do what the survivors, the bereaved, the families, the communities most want, which is show our determination to ensure this does never happen again.
Alan Gemmill.
Madam Deputy Speaker, today's report lists a series of terrible failures that let down the Grenfell community. The Grenfell fire affected communities in every part of the UK, and I wanted to pass on the thoughts of my constituents in Irvine to families and loved ones. A fire at a 14-storey block of flats in Irvine in 1999 spread via external cladding. The Garnet Court fire resulted in one fatality and resulted in changes to Scottish building regulations. The then local MP fought to have those building regulations implemented, and I hope my right honourable friend will look at the lessons from the Garnet Court fire as he starts to address this terrible injustice.
Prime Minister.
Yes, we have to look at this question of external cladding. I mean, some measures have been taken in the last 7 years, as I referenced in my statement, but we need to look again. And the description that I was given when I was at the tower of how the fire spread and the role played by the cladding was very, very chilling.
John MacDonald.
Can I just say it's been difficult to contain in one's anger, having read the report now, the summary of the report. As a West London MP, like many of us, we visited the site soon after, and in those following months we met with the victims, the families of the victims, we met with the firefighters and the call centre operators who were traumatised, and some have never recovered. We met with local representatives. At that point I called it social murder and was castigated for using that expression. Yeah. This report defines it was social murder. We need now, exactly as the Prime Minister said, urgent action. We've been promised a debate. For that debate, could we have the definitive report for each of our constituencies on what action has been taken, what action will be taken, and what the deadline will be? Can I return to one of the recommendations specifically in the report, which is 113.7, which is in the building regulations, we defined higher buildings as above 7 stories or 18 metres. That takes no account of those other properties where there are vulnerable residents in particular and are now at risk. The recommendation is to urgently review those regulations. Could we have a timetable for that review of the regulations? Because it does have consequences for many of our constituents.
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for making that point. On the question of the debate, I do think it's really important that as much information is made available as possible and that we're able to deal with the questions that members of this House raise, which is why we look at the date of that debate. I want it to be as quickly as possible, but I don't want it to be so quick that members will be frustrated because they will rightly want information or assurances that need a little bit of working through. So I'll try and make sure that is that happens. And on the question of the safety of buildings that aren't of a specific height, that is, I think, amongst the issues that we have to look at here. We're all well aware of these cases. They are very troubling, and that has to be part of the debate. Thank you.
Well, that concludes that very serious statement. I'll give the front benches some time to vacate and allow the new front bench.
That was fucking depressing. Not gonna lie. Like, I was fucking angry through most of that. Like, you're crying. I'm not crying. Seriously though, anger. I hate government sometimes, honestly. They're just so shit. They convince people about bollocks. And it's like the worst part of that entire fucking statement in terms of, but not these people, what the judge or former judge said. Fucking greed. Like, they did that to make money. Give you the shittest crap. Put it on your fucking block of flats and say, oh, don't that look pretty? Until it catches fire. Fucking bastards. Honestly. Fucking terrible. Fuck knows if they're going to do anything. Better not take 7 years. The one thing I hope they do, though, is chase the fucking law. Because I don't think anyone's fucking going to jail. And that's depressing. If no one goes to jail, I mean, what's the point? Like, for real. And it's not just even the companies who made money. Who are these mad officials that were in cahoots? Or are that stupid they knew they got blagged for a backhander? Like, I mean, come on. Like, it weren't just the dirty companies who want to make money. That's their job, to rip people off. It's a fucking business. You know what I'm saying? But who are all these people in the council and fucking the building regulators? Like, what the get your thumb out your fucking ass. Like, they should be held responsible as well. Like, I don't know, they're gonna fucking get prosecuted, but fucking hope they do as well. Fucking terrible. Anyway, sorry for the, like, mad rants and shit, but fucking hell. Horrible fucking thing, that. You know what I mean? Especially, as, like, as a scouser, you know, fucking about Hillsborough, that was fucking bollocks. How long did we wait for it? Didn't even get justice, really, but whatever. I'm saying. But I hope Grenfell, hope they actually fuckers go to jail. They fucking deserve to, that's for sure. Anyway, I'll be back tomorrow, maybe, I think. I don't know, I think it's question time on next week. I'm not too sure. I'll have a gander. But if you see me tomorrow, you know why. Because question time's back on. And next week, if you're up late and you got your popcorn, Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump is next week, so put that in your fucking diary, because that should be entertaining. It ain't going to be Joe Biden, it's going to be Kamala Harris, the prosecutor, versus the felon. It's like fucking WWE. Anyway, hope you all have a lovely day, and I try to keep the rants as minimal as possible. But yeah, that was fucking annoying. Anywho,